Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Hollow. Today I am back with 9 chilling Appalachian horror stories. In this episode, we will venture deep into the ancient ridges and forgotten hollows of America's oldest mountains with 9 terrifying tales that have haunted these hills for generations. Each story has been meticulously researched from documented encounters, police reports, and first-hand testimonies of those who survived to share their experiences. These accounts span from the misty peaks of West Virginia to the deep valleys of Tennessee, revealing the dark secrets that the Appalachian wilderness keeps hidden. To protect the privacy of those involved, names and specific locations have been carefully altered while preserving the authenticity of each encounter. These are not campfire legends or folklore passed down through generations, but real events experienced by real people who found themselves face to face with forces they could never explain. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Midnight Hollow for daily true horror content that will keep you questioning what lurks in the shadows. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when darkness descends upon our channel. Now, let us begin our journey into the heart of Appalachian terror. Casson had been a wildlife photographer for 8 years, specializing in documenting the remote waterfalls scattered throughout West Virginia's ancient mountains. His portfolio included shots from over 40 different falls, each requiring overnight camping to capture the perfect lighting conditions during golden hour. In late October 2019, he received a tip from a park ranger about an unnamed waterfall deep in the Monongahela National Forest, approximately 12 miles southeast of Elkins. The ranger described it as a 40-foot cascade that locals called Cataract Falls, accessible only by an unmarked trail that branched off from the main hiking path near Seneca Creek. The weather forecast showed clear skies and temperatures dropping into the low 30s overnight. Perfect conditions for capturing the mist rising from the waterfall at dawn. Casson packed his standard backcountry gear: a lightweight 2-person tent, sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees, portable camp stove, 3 days of freeze-dried meals, water purification tablets, and his photography equipment secured in a weatherproof case. His camera bag contained a Canon 5D Mark IV with multiple lenses, including a 16 to 35 mm wide angle for landscape shots and a 70 to 200 mm telephoto for wildlife, along with a sturdy carbon fiber tripod and remote shutter release. He parked his Toyota 4Runner at the Seneca Creek trailhead at 2:30 in the afternoon on October 24th. The parking area was empty except for one other vehicle, a mud-splattered pickup truck with local plates. After signing the trail register, he noticed the last entry was from 3 days prior. The trail began as a well-maintained path through mixed hardwood forest, the ground covered in a thick layer of maple and oak leaves that rustled softly underfoot. The air carried the earthy scent of decomposing vegetation mixed with the distant sound of running water. Following the ranger's directions, Casson hiked 2.5 miles along the main trail before locating the unmarked turnoff. The side trail was barely visible, marked only by a small stack of rocks and a faded red ribbon tied to a birch tree. This path was significantly more challenging, winding steeply downward through dense undergrowth and over moss-covered boulders. After 45 minutes of careful navigation, he heard the distinctive sound of falling water echoing through the trees. Cataract Falls exceeded his expectations. The waterfall dropped in 3 distinct tiers, each creating its own pool before spilling into the next level. The surrounding rock formations were covered in vibrant green moss, and shafts of late afternoon sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dramatic lighting conditions. Casson spent the remaining daylight hours scouting different vantage points and taking test shots to determine the best positioning for his equipment the following morning. As darkness approached, he established his campsite on a level area approximately 50 yards from the base of the falls. The location provided shelter from wind while maintaining clear sight lines to the waterfall for safety purposes. He set up his tent with the entrance facing away from the falls to minimize condensation from the mist, then prepared a simple dinner of beef stew and instant coffee. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees by 8 p.m., and he could see his breath in the beam of his headlamp. The first incident occurred at 11:15 p.m. Casson was reviewing the day's photos on his camera when he heard what sounded like someone calling for help from across the creek. The voice was male, middle-aged, and carried a distinct West Virginia accent. The caller was shouting, "Help me, I'm hurt," repeatedly with approximately 10-second intervals between calls. The sound appeared to originate from the steep hillside on the opposite bank, roughly 200 yards upstream from the falls. Casson immediately responded by shouting back, "Where are you? I'm coming to help." He grabbed his headlamp, first aid kit, an emergency whistle, then began making his way toward the sound. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks and hidden roots creating significant hazards. As he approached the area where the calls seemed to originate, they stopped abruptly. He spent 20 minutes searching the hillside, calling out and listening for any response, but heard nothing except the constant sound of the waterfall and normal forest noises. Concerned that someone might be seriously injured, Casson returned to his campsite and attempted to contact emergency services using his satellite communicator. However, the device showed no signal due to the deep canyon walls surrounding the waterfall. He made the decision to continue monitoring the situation throughout the night, keeping his gear packed and ready to hike out for help if the calls resumed. At 1:45 a.m., the voice returned. This time it sounded closer, coming from directly across the creek at the base of the falls. The same male voice was calling, "Help me, I can't get out," with the same 10-second intervals. Casson grabbed his most powerful flashlight and shined it across the water, sweeping the beam along the rocky shoreline and pool areas. He could see no sign of anyone in distress, no movement, and no reflective clothing or equipment that would indicate a person's presence. Despite the dangerous conditions, Casson decided to cross the creek to investigate. He found a narrow area where fallen logs created a makeshift bridge about 30 yards downstream from the falls. The crossing took several minutes due to the slippery surface and strong current flowing beneath the logs. Once on the opposite bank, he methodically searched the area where the calls appeared to originate, shining his light into every crevice and behind every boulder. The calls continued during his entire search, always seeming to come from just beyond the reach of his flashlight beam. When he moved toward the sound, it would shift to a different location. After 45 minutes of searching, he had covered the entire shoreline and climbed partway up the steep slope without finding any trace of a person in need of assistance. The voice stopped calling at exactly 2:30 a.m., cutting off mid-sentence as if someone had turned off a radio. Casson returned to his campsite, deeply disturbed by the experience, but assumed there must be a logical explanation. Perhaps sound was being distorted by the canyon acoustics, or someone was playing a prank using electronic equipment hidden in the forest. He documented the incident in his field notebook, recording the exact times, locations, and characteristics of the calls before attempting to get some rest. The phenomenon repeated at 4:10 a.m. This time the voice was calling from yet another location approximately 100 yards downstream from the falls on his side of the creek. The caller was shouting, "I'm trapped under a log. Help me," with increasing urgency. Casson immediately began searching the area with his flashlight, focusing on fallen trees and debris piles where someone could potentially become trapped. As he searched, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The voice was perfectly clear and distinct, with no variation in volume or tone despite his changing distance from the supposed source. When he stood directly at the location where the sound seemed strongest, he should have been able to see the caller clearly. Instead, there was nothing but an empty stream bed and scattered rocks. More unsettling was the realization that the voice was always calling for help with different scenarios. First claiming to be hurt on the hillside, then unable to get out of the water, and finally trapped under debris. The timing was too regular, the scenarios too varied, and the voice too consistent to be genuine distress calls from an actual person. At 4:30 a.m., Casson made the decision to pack up his equipment and leave immediately. The photography opportunity was no longer worth the psychological stress of the inexplicable voices. As he began breaking down his campsite, the calls stopped once again, but this time they were replaced by something even more disturbing. From multiple locations around the waterfall, he began hearing what sounded like echoed responses to his own voice from earlier in the evening. The sound was his own voice saying, "Where are you? I'm coming to help," but distorted and hollow, as if being played back through a tunnel. The playback occurred at different distances and directions, creating an overlapping chorus of his own words that seemed to surround the entire area. The final incident occurred as Casson was preparing to cross back to the main trail. At 5:15 a.m., just as the first hints of dawn were beginning to light the sky, he heard multiple voices calling simultaneously from different directions. There was the original male voice, but now it was joined by what sounded like a woman calling, "Please don't leave me here," and a younger voice, possibly a teenager, shouting, "Help us get home." All three voices were calling continuously with overlapping timing, creating a cacophony of distress calls that echoed off the canyon walls. The sound was overwhelming and completely unnatural, as no group of lost hikers would all be calling for help simultaneously without responding to each other or acknowledging his presence when he called back. Casson abandoned any attempt to investigate further and focused solely on getting out of the canyon as quickly as possible. The hike back to his vehicle took nearly 3 hours due to the steep terrain and his exhausted state from the sleepless night. As he reached the main trail, the voices gradually faded until they were no longer audible above the normal forest sounds. At the trailhead, he discovered that the pickup truck from the day before was still parked in the same location. Upon closer inspection, he noticed a thick layer of dust on the windshield and several weeks' worth of leaves accumulated around the tires, suggesting the vehicle had been abandoned for an extended period. This discovery added another layer of unease to his experience. Casson drove directly to the ranger station in Elkins and reported the incident to Ranger Patricia Mills, the same person who had originally told him about the falls. She listened to his account with a serious expression, then revealed that Cataract Falls had a history of similar reports dating back over 15 years. At least 6 other visitors had described hearing distress calls at night, always with the same characteristics: multiple voices, changing locations, and no physical evidence of people in need of assistance. Ranger Mills explained that the area had been the site of several actual missing person cases over the decades, including a hunting party that disappeared in 1987 and a solo hiker who vanished in 2003. Search and rescue operations had been conducted multiple times, but no bodies were ever recovered. She theorized that the canyon's unique acoustic properties might be causing some form of sound phenomenon, but acknowledged that no scientific explanation had been established. The ranger also mentioned that the abandoned pickup truck belonged to Marcus Webb, a local photographer who had disappeared 6 months earlier while attempting to document the same waterfall. His truck had been found at the trailhead, but despite extensive search efforts, no trace of Webb had ever been discovered. His camera equipment was never located, and the case remained an active missing person investigation. Following his report to the rangers, Casson reviewed the digital photos he had taken before the incidents began. While examining the images on his computer later that day, he made a disturbing discovery. In several shots taken near the waterfall, there appeared to be faint human figures visible in the mist and shadows, though he had seen no one during his visit. The figures were translucent and indistinct, appearing only when he enhanced the contrast and brightness of the images. One photograph taken just before sunset showed what appeared to be a person standing on the rocks near the base of the falls. The figure was wearing what looked like hiking gear and appeared to be waving or gesturing, but Casson had no memory of seeing anyone in that location when he took the shot. The image was clear enough to suggest it was not a trick of light or shadow, but rather something that had been present at the time of photography. Casson submitted copies of the photographs to the rangers and local law enforcement as potential evidence in the ongoing missing person cases. However, image analysis by technical experts was inconclusive, with some suggesting the figures could be explained by atmospheric conditions and camera artifacts, while others found no natural explanation for their presence. In the months following his experience, Casson researched the history of the area extensively. He discovered that Cataract Falls was known to local Native American tribes as a place where the spirits of those who died in the forest would call out to the living. Historical records from early European settlers also mentioned similar phenomena, describing voices in the night that would lead travelers astray or cause them to become lost in the wilderness. The experience fundamentally changed Casson's approach to solo wilderness photography. He now travels with a partner whenever possible and avoids camping in areas with histories of unexplained disappearances. He has returned to document other waterfalls throughout West Virginia, but has never gone back to Cataract Falls despite multiple requests from paranormal investigators and fellow photographers. The case of Marcus Webb remains unsolved, and the abandoned pickup truck was eventually removed from the trailhead. Ranger Mills reported that the incidents of phantom voices have continued, with at least 3 more hikers describing similar experiences in the 2 years following Casson's encounter. The Monongahela National Forest Service has since posted additional warning signs at the trailhead, advising visitors to hike in groups and carry emergency communication devices when exploring remote areas. To this day, Casson cannot explain what he experienced at Cataract Falls. The voices were too clear and consistent to be dismissed as imagination or acoustic tricks. Yet no physical evidence of people in distress was ever found. Whether the phenomenon represents some form of paranormal activity or an undiscovered natural occurrence remains an open question, but the psychological impact of the experience continues to influence his decisions about wilderness exploration. Malaya had been an avid day hiker for 6 years, specializing in solo excursions through the more remote sections of Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest. As a 28-year-old emergency medical technician from Lexington, she understood the importance of safety protocols and always carried comprehensive first aid supplies, emergency communication devices, and detailed trail maps. Her experience included over 40 different hiking locations throughout the state, from the popular Red River Gorge area to lesser-known trails in the Cumberland Gap region. On September 14, 2020, she decided to explore the Shell Towie Trace near the abandoned coal mining areas of southeastern Kentucky, specifically a 12-mile section that passed through former strip mining sites that had been partially reclaimed by the Forest Service. The area was known for its challenging terrain and sparse visitor traffic, making it ideal for photographers and experienced hikers seeking solitude. Recent rainfall had created optimal conditions for documenting the region's unique ecosystem, where industrial scars were slowly being healed by natural regrowth. Malaya's planned route began at the Laurel River Road trailhead near Corbin and would take her through a series of ridge lines that offered panoramic views of the Cumberland Mountains. She packed her standard day hiking gear: a 35-liter backpack containing 3 liters of water, high-energy snacks, rain gear, emergency bivy, first aid kit, headlamp, whistle, and her GPS unit with offline maps. She also carried bear spray and a personal alarm device, standard precautions for solo hiking in remote areas. The trailhead parking area was empty when she arrived at 7:15 a.m., which was typical for weekday hiking in this less-traveled section of the forest. The trail register showed only 2 entries from the previous week, both from local hunters preparing for the upcoming season. She signed in with her planned route and expected return time of 4 p.m., then began hiking north along the well-marked Shell Towie Trace. The first 4 miles proceeded normally through mixed hardwood forest and occasional clearings where mining operations had occurred decades earlier. The trail was well-maintained despite its remote location, with clear blazes marking the route and several wooden bridges crossing small streams. Malaya documented the contrast between the recovering landscape and remnants of industrial activity, photographing rusted equipment and concrete foundations slowly being reclaimed by vegetation. At approximately 9:30 a.m., she encountered the first unusual sign while crossing an area where the trail passed between 2 steep ridge lines. Fresh tire tracks were visible in the soft mud near a stream crossing, indicating that vehicles had been using an old mining road that intersected with the hiking trail. The tracks appeared to be for multiple vehicles, including at least 1 large truck or SUV, and seemed to be no more than a day or 2 old based on their condition. More concerning was the discovery of several pieces of equipment that did not belong on a hiking trail. Hidden in the brush near the vehicle tracks, she found a portable generator, several plastic coolers, and what appeared to be camping chairs arranged in a semicircle. The items were covered with camouflage netting and positioned to be invisible from the main trail unless someone ventured off the marked path, as she had done while photographing. Malaya's EMT training had taught her to recognize signs of drug manufacturing operations, and the setup immediately raised red flags. However, the equipment seemed too organized and the location too accessible by vehicle to be a typical methamphetamine lab. She photographed the scene from a distance without disturbing anything, then returned to the main trail and continued hiking while remaining more alert to her surroundings. The second incident occurred 2 miles further north near an area where the trail curved around a large strip mining pit that had been converted into a pond. She was approached by 2 men who appeared to be in their 30s, both wearing hunting clothing and carrying backpacks that seemed unusually light for the remote location. They introduced themselves as Jake and Tommy, claiming to be scouting hunting locations for the upcoming deer season. The conversation began normally with typical trail small talk about hiking conditions and wildlife sightings. However, Malaya noticed several details that seemed inconsistent with their stated purpose. Their boots showed minimal wear despite claiming to have been hiking for several hours. Their clothing was unusually clean, and neither carried the type of equipment typically used for hunting reconnaissance, such as binoculars, trail cameras, or topographic maps. More unsettling was their persistent interest in her hiking plans and schedule. Jake repeatedly asked about her intended route, whether she was hiking alone, and when she planned to return to her vehicle. When she provided vague answers, Tommy suggested that she might enjoy exploring some really scenic areas that were not marked on standard trail maps, offering to guide her to locations that offered better photo opportunities than the main trail. The men described several off-trail destinations that would require following old mining roads and unmarked paths through areas where cell phone coverage was non-existent. They emphasized that these locations were completely private and that she would be unlikely to encounter other hikers. Their descriptions were detailed and specific, suggesting genuine knowledge of the terrain, but their insistence on guiding her to isolated areas raised immediate concerns. Malaya politely declined their offers while maintaining a friendly demeanor, explaining that she preferred to stick to established trails for safety reasons. She noticed that both men became noticeably less talkative after her refusal and seemed to be communicating through subtle glances and gestures. After approximately 10 minutes of conversation, they claimed to be heading in the opposite direction and continued south on the trail. However, 30 minutes later, she spotted the same two men approximately half a mile ahead of her on the trail, moving in the same direction she was traveling. They appeared to be waiting at a trail junction where several old mining roads converged with the main hiking path. When they saw her approaching, they moved out of sight into the forest, but remained close enough that she could occasionally hear their voices through the trees. At this point, Malaya made the decision to alter her planned route significantly. Instead of continuing north on the Sheltawi Trace as intended, she took a connecting trail that led east toward a more heavily traveled section of the forest near Cumberland Falls State Park. The change would add several miles to her hike, but would bring her closer to areas with better cell phone coverage and higher likelihood of encountering other visitors. As she began following the alternate route, she noticed that Jake and Tommy emerged from the forest behind her and began following at a distance of approximately 200 yards. They made no attempt to catch up or engage in conversation, but maintained a consistent pace that kept them within visual range. Their behavior had shifted from seemingly friendly hikers to something that resembled surveillance or tracking. The pursuit continued for over an hour as Malaya navigated the connecting trail system. Every time she stopped to check her map or take a water break, the two men would also stop and wait. When she increased her pace, they matched her speed. When she deliberately took a wrong turn at a trail junction to test their intentions, they followed the same incorrect path rather than continuing on what would have been the logical route for hunters scouting their claimed destination. Most disturbing was the appearance of a third individual whom she had not seen before. While crossing a ridge that offered views of the surrounding terrain, she observed a man in camouflage clothing positioned on a parallel ridge line, moving in the same general direction as her group, but maintaining a higher elevation. He appeared to be carrying communication equipment, possibly a two-way radio, and seemed to be coordinating with Jake and Tommy below. The realization that she was being tracked by multiple individuals using coordinated tactics prompted Malaya to treat the situation as a genuine emergency. She activated the SOS function on her GPS device, which sent a distress signal with her location coordinates to emergency services. She also used the device's messaging feature to send a brief text to her emergency contact describing the situation and her location. Rather than continuing on the planned route toward Cumberland Falls, she made an abrupt change of direction and began hiking rapidly toward the nearest road access point, which according to her map was approximately 3 miles to the southeast. The route would require leaving marked trails and navigating through difficult terrain, but would bring her to a county road where she could flag down vehicle traffic or reach areas with cell phone coverage. As she changed direction, the coordinated pursuit became more obvious and aggressive. Jake and Tommy abandoned any pretense of casual hiking and began moving directly toward her position rather than following trails. The third man on the ridge line also adjusted his route to maintain his overwatch position relative to her movement. The behavior clearly indicated that they were working together to control her movement and prevent her from reaching help. The chase continued for approximately 45 minutes as Malaya navigated steep terrain, dense undergrowth, and several creek crossings while trying to reach the road. Her EMT physical fitness training proved crucial as she was able to maintain a pace that kept her ahead of her pursuers despite their apparent familiarity with the terrain. However, the effort was exhausting, and she knew she could not continue indefinitely. Relief came when she reached a logging road approximately 1 mile from the county highway. A Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife truck was parked at the intersection, and Officer David Patterson was conducting routine patrol activities in the area. Malaya immediately approached the officer and explained the situation, providing descriptions of her 3 pursuers and their last known positions. Officer Patterson took the report seriously and immediately radioed for backup while escorting Malaya to safety. Within 20 minutes, additional law enforcement units arrived, including officers from the Laurel County Sheriff's Department and Kentucky State Police. A coordinated search was conducted of the area where the pursuit had occurred, focusing on the locations where she had first encountered Jake and Tommy. The search revealed significant evidence of organized criminal activity in the remote mining areas. At the location where Malaya had photographed the hidden equipment, officers discovered a much more extensive operation than what had been visible from the trail. Concealed beneath camouflage netting were multiple generators, temporary shelters, communication equipment, and supplies that suggested the site had been used as a base of operations for an extended period. Most disturbing was the discovery of personal items that appeared to belong to other hikers, including several backpacks, water bottles with names written on them, and pieces of identification. Among the items was a Kentucky driver's license belonging to Jennifer Walsh, a 24-year-old college student who had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier after failing to return from a solo hiking trip in the same general area. Further investigation revealed that the site was being used as a staging area for a human trafficking operation that targeted isolated hikers, particularly young women who were hiking alone in remote areas. The perpetrators would approach potential victims on trails, attempt to lure them to isolated locations, and then use coordinated tactics to prevent escape while they were transported to secondary locations. Detective Lisa Morrison of the Kentucky State Police Human Trafficking Unit explained that the operation represented a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been active in eastern Kentucky for at least 2 years. The group specifically targeted the remote mining areas because they offered multiple vehicle access points, limited law enforcement presence, and terrain that made escape difficult for victims who were unfamiliar with the area. The 3 men who had pursued Malaya were identified through witness descriptions and security camera footage from nearby businesses. Jake was actually Marcus Reed, 34, with previous convictions for kidnapping and assault. Tommy was identified as Stephen Clark, 31, who had been wanted on federal charges related to interstate transportation of minors for commercial sexual exploitation. The third man remained unidentified, but was believed to be part of a larger network operating throughout Appalachian regions of Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. The investigation revealed that the group used a method known as herding, where multiple individuals would work together to guide potential victims away from established trails and toward predetermined locations where they could be isolated and controlled. The technique was particularly effective in areas like the Daniel Boone National Forest, where the complex trail system and numerous unmarked mining roads created multiple opportunities for misdirection. Jennifer Walsh was located alive 3 days later at a truck stop in Tennessee, where she was being held with several other trafficking victims. Her rescue led to the identification of additional crimes and victims throughout the region. She confirmed that her initial encounter had followed the same pattern as Malaya's experience, with seemingly friendly individuals offering to guide her to scenic locations before the situation became threatening. The case resulted in federal charges against 12 individuals involved in the trafficking operation, including charges under the Mann Act for interstate transportation of victims. The investigation also led to enhanced safety protocols for the Daniel Boone National Forest, including increased law enforcement patrols in remote areas and additional warning signs at trailheads advising hikers about the risks of leaving established trails with unknown individuals. Malaya's quick thinking and emergency preparedness were credited with not only ensuring her own safety, but also leading to the rescue of multiple trafficking victims and the disruption of a major criminal operation. Her decision to carry GPS emergency communication equipment and to trust her instincts when the situation felt wrong were identified as key factors in the successful outcome. The Forest Service implemented new safety recommendations based on lessons learned from the case, including advice for hikers to be suspicious of individuals who show excessive interest in their hiking plans, offer to guide them to unmarked locations, or persist in following them despite being declined. The recommendations also emphasize the importance of informing others about hiking plans and carrying emergency communication devices when exploring remote areas. Detective Morrison noted that human trafficking operations often target outdoor recreation areas because victims can be isolated without attracting attention from the general public. The remote nature of many hiking trails combined with limited cell phone coverage and infrequent patrol presence creates opportunities for criminals to operate with reduced risk of detection. The psychological impact on Malaya was significant, fundamentally changing her approach to solo hiking despite her extensive experience and training. She now hikes exclusively with partners and avoids remote areas that lack regular law enforcement presence. She has become an advocate for hiking safety education, particularly focusing on helping other women recognize and respond to potential trafficking situations in outdoor recreation areas. The case highlighted the intersection between outdoor recreation and human trafficking, demonstrating that criminal organizations actively seek to exploit the isolation and vulnerability that can occur in wilderness settings. The sophisticated nature of the operation, including coordinated tactics and detailed knowledge of trail systems, indicated that the perpetrators had invested significant time and resources in developing their methods. To this day, the investigation remains active as law enforcement works to identify all members of the trafficking network and locate additional victims. The remote mining areas of eastern Kentucky continue to be monitored for similar criminal activity, and hikers are encouraged to report any suspicious encounters or evidence of unauthorized camps or equipment in the forest. Malaya's experience serves as a critical reminder that while the wilderness offers opportunities for recreation and solitude, it can also provide cover for criminal activities that prey on the isolation that attracts many outdoor enthusiasts. Her survival depended on recognizing warning signs, trusting her instincts, and having the equipment and knowledge necessary to summon help when the situation became dangerous. Jason had been backpacking for 7 years with a particular fascination for solo overnight trips in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. As a 31-year-old environmental science graduate student from Boone, she combined her research interests with her passion for wilderness exploration, often spending weekends documenting plant communities and wildlife behavior in remote locations. Her experience included successful solo expeditions on sections of the Appalachian Trail, multiple peaks in the Pisgah National Forest, and challenging terrain throughout the southern Appalachians. In mid-October 2021, she planned a 3-day backpacking trip to the backcountry areas of Grandfather Mountain State Park, specifically targeting the remote camping zones accessible only by unmarked trails that branched off from the Profile Trail system. The area was known for its diverse ecosystem transitions, challenging weather conditions, and spectacular views of the Linville Gorge. Recent autumn conditions had created optimal visibility for her research photography, while providing the solitude she sought for detailed botanical documentation. Jason's gear reflected her experience and scientific background. Her 60-liter pack contained a lightweight 4-season tent, sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees, portable camping stove, water filtration system, and 3 days of carefully planned meals. Her research equipment included a professional camera with macro lenses for plant photography, GPS unit with offline topographic maps, altimeter, weather radio, and detailed field notebooks for documenting her observations. She also carried standard safety gear, including first aid supplies, emergency shelter, and satellite messenger device. The trailhead parking area at the Profile Trail access point contained only 2 other vehicles when she arrived at 10:30 a.m. on October 15th. The trail register showed moderate activity from day hikers, but no overnight camping entries for the previous week, indicating she would likely have the backcountry areas to herself. She signed in with her planned route and expected return date of October 18th, then began the approach hike toward the designated wilderness camping areas. The first day proceeded according to plan as she navigated the well-maintained profile trail for approximately 4 miles before branching onto the unmarked backcountry routes that led toward her intended camping area near the Linville Peak ridgeline. The terrain was challenging but familiar, consisting of steep granite outcroppings, dense rhododendron thickets, and mixed hardwood forest typical of the high-elevation zones around Grandfather Mountain. Weather conditions were optimal with clear skies, temperatures in the mid-50s, and no precipitation in the forecast. At approximately 3:15 p.m., she reached a level area near a small creek that appeared ideal for her research campsite. The location offered access to diverse plant communities, protection from wind, and a reliable water source. Most importantly, it provided the isolation necessary for conducting detailed observations without human interference. She established her camp according to leave no trace principles, positioning her tent on durable surfaces and ensuring all food was properly stored away from wildlife. After setting up camp, Jason spent the remaining daylight hours conducting initial surveys of the surrounding vegetation and establishing photo points for documenting her research subjects. She noted several interesting plant specimens that warranted detailed photography the following morning, including rare high-elevation ferns and what appeared to be an unusual moss community growing on the granite substrates. Her GPS showed her location as approximately 2 miles from the nearest marked trail in an area that received minimal visitor traffic. As darkness approached, she prepared dinner and reviewed her research notes while enjoying the peaceful forest sounds that surrounded her campsite. The evening was unremarkable, with typical nocturnal wildlife activity, including the calls of owls and the movement of small mammals through the underbrush. She retired to her tent at 9:45 p.m., setting her watch alarm for 6 a.m. to take advantage of optimal morning lighting conditions for photography. The first unusual incident occurred during the night, though Jason would not become fully aware of its significance until the following day. She was awakened at what she estimated to be approximately 2 a.m. by the sound of voices and equipment moving near her campsite. The sound suggested the presence of other backpackers setting up a camp within 50 yards of her location, including the distinctive noises of tent poles being assembled and gear being organized. Initially, she was surprised that other campers had arrived in such a remote location during the night, but assumed they were late-arriving backpackers who had been delayed on the trail. She considered greeting them, but decided against disturbing what might be tired hikers trying to establish their camp quickly. The sounds continued for approximately 30 minutes before quieting down, and she returned to sleep without further concern. When she emerged from her tent at 6:15 a.m., however, there was no evidence of any other camping activity in the area. She conducted a thorough search within a 100-yard radius of her campsite, looking for any signs of the camp she had heard being established during the night. There were no tent sites, no equipment marks in the soil, no trampled vegetation, and no human tracks or other evidence that anyone had been in the area recently. More puzzling was the complete absence of any suitable camping locations within the range where the sounds had seemed to originate. The terrain in that direction consisted of steep slopes covered in dense rhododendron and scattered granite boulders that would make tent placement impossible. Jason documented the incident in her field notebook with precise GPS coordinates and began to question whether she had been dreaming or misidentifying natural sounds. The second anomaly became apparent as she began her research activities that morning. According to her GPS unit and altimeter, she was camping at an elevation of 4,280 feet on a northeast-facing slope approximately 1.2 miles from Linville Peak. However, when she began photographing the plant communities she had identified the previous evening, she could not locate several of the specimens that had been the primary reason for choosing this particular campsite. The rare fern colony that she had carefully marked with small flags was absent, with no evidence that ferns had ever grown in the location. The unusual moss community on the granite outcroppings had been replaced by common species typical of much lower elevations. Most disturbing was the discovery that the granite formations themselves appeared different, with different patterns of weathering and lichen growth than she had documented in her photographs from the previous afternoon. Jasmine spent over 2 hours attempting to reconcile these discrepancies by reviewing her photos, checking her GPS coordinates, and conducting additional surveys of the surrounding area. Her equipment appeared to be functioning normally, and her GPS showed her location as consistent with the previous day's readings. However, the botanical evidence strongly suggested she was in a completely different location despite having remained in the same campsite throughout the night. The third incident occurred when she attempted to hike to a scenic overlook that she had identified on her topographic map as being approximately half a mile southeast of her campsite. The overlook was marked as offering views of the Linville Gorge and was intended to serve as a control point for verifying her location and conducting additional research photography. According to her map and GPS, the hike should have taken approximately 20 minutes over moderate terrain. After hiking for 45 minutes in the correct direction according to her compass and GPS, she had not reached the overlook and found herself in terrain that did not match her topographic maps. Instead of the expected ridgeline trail leading to scenic views, she encountered dense forest with no apparent breaks in the canopy and no elevated vantage points. Her GPS continued to show her moving in the correct direction, but the landscape bore no resemblance to what was indicated on her maps. When she turned around to return to camp, the hike back took nearly 2 hours. Despite following the same compass bearing in reverse, the trail she had created while hiking out seemed to have disappeared, and familiar landmarks from her outbound journey were no longer visible. She began to experience a growing sense of disorientation that was completely foreign to her extensive hiking experience and navigation skills. Most unsettling was the discovery that her GPS unit was showing increasingly inconsistent readings. While the device appeared to be functioning normally with good satellite reception, the coordinates it displayed seemed to drift randomly even when she remained stationary. At one point, the unit showed her location as being nearly a mile from where she had been standing just minutes earlier, despite not having moved from that spot. Back at her campsite, Jasmine attempted to contact emergency services using her satellite messenger device, not because she felt she was in immediate danger, but because the navigation anomalies were severe enough to warrant professional assessment. However, the device failed to establish a satellite connection despite showing full signal strength and clear sky conditions. The failure was particularly concerning because she had tested the device successfully just 2 days earlier. That evening, she experienced the most disturbing incident of her trip. While reviewing her research photos on her camera, she discovered images that she had no memory of taking. Mixed among her botanical photographs were several pictures of her own campsite taken from various angles and distances, as if someone else had been photographing her camp while she was away. The images showed her tent, equipment, and cooking area from perspectives that would have required the photographer to be positioned in locations where she had found no evidence of human presence. More troubling were the timestamps on the mystery photographs. According to the camera's internal clock, the images had been taken during the night while she was sleeping in her tent and during periods when she remembered being in camp conducting research activities. The photos appeared to have been taken with her own camera, as evidenced by the identical settings and image quality, but she had no recollection of taking them and had kept the camera secured in her tent overnight. One photograph showed her campsite from an elevated position that would have required the photographer to be positioned at least 30 feet above ground level in a tree or on a rock formation. However, her survey of the area had revealed no such elevated positions within photographic range of her campsite. The image clearly showed details of her equipment layout that would not have been visible from ground level, suggesting the photographer had an aerial perspective that should have been impossible to achieve. The final anomaly occurred on her planned departure day. After breaking camp on the morning of October 18th, she began the hike back to the trailhead using the same route she had followed during her approach 3 days earlier. According to her GPS and the landmarks she had noted during her inbound journey, the hike should have taken approximately 4 hours over familiar terrain. However, after hiking for over 6 hours in what her GPS indicated was the correct direction, she found herself at a trailhead that was completely unfamiliar. The parking area was different from where she had left her vehicle, with different facilities and trail signs that did not match her memory of the starting location. Her car was nowhere to be seen, and the trail maps posted at this location showed a completely different trail system than what she had used to access her camping area. According to the trail signs, she was at the Rough Ridge Trail parking area, which was approximately 8 miles from where she had originally started her hike. The distance was far beyond what she could have covered accidentally, and the terrain between the two locations included several major obstacles that she would have remembered encountering. More puzzling was the fact that her GPS showed her current location as being exactly where she had parked her car 3 days earlier. Jason used the emergency phone at the trailhead to contact the Grandfather Mountain State Park rangers, explaining that she seemed to have become lost during her return hike. Ranger Michael Stevens responded to her call and provided transportation back to the Profile Trail parking area, where her vehicle was located exactly where she had left it 3 days earlier. During the drive, she attempted to explain the navigation problems she had experienced, but found that many of the details had become unclear in her memory. Most disturbing was her realization that she could not clearly recall many aspects of her 3-day trip. While she remembered setting up camp and the general activities of her research, specific details about her daily routines, meals, and observations had become vague and uncertain. Her field notebook, which she had been meticulously maintaining throughout the trip, contained entries that seemed incomplete and in some cases described activities and observations that did not match her memories. Ranger Stevens listened to her account with professional attention and asked detailed questions about her route, camping location, and the unusual experiences she had described. He explained that the Grandfather Mountain area was known for challenging navigation conditions due to frequent weather changes, complex terrain, and magnetic anomalies that could affect compass and GPS readings. However, he acknowledged that the extent of the problems she described was unusual even for that challenging environment. The ranger also mentioned that the park had received several similar reports over the past few years involving experienced hikers who became disoriented in ways that were inconsistent with their skill level and equipment. While most cases were eventually attributed to equipment failure, fatigue, or weather conditions, some remained unexplained and had prompted the Park Service to increase safety warnings and recommend that backpackers travel in groups when possible. Following her report, Jason attempted to download and analyzed the GPS track data from her hike to better understand what had occurred. However, the data files appeared to be corrupted or incomplete, showing large gaps where no position information had been recorded despite the device appearing to function normally throughout the trip. The satellite messenger device showed similar data anomalies with no record of her attempts to send emergency messages despite her clear memory of trying to use the device. When she developed and examined her research photographs, she found additional images that she did not remember taking, including several that appeared to show her campsite at different times of day with different weather conditions than she remembered experiencing. Some photos showed her equipment arranged differently than she recalled, and others included shadows and lighting that seemed inconsistent with the timestamps recorded by the camera. Most puzzling was a series of photographs that appeared to show the same botanical subjects from her research, but in different seasons. Some images showed the plants in full summer foliage, while others depicted winter conditions despite her trip taking place during mid-autumn. The timestamps on all photographs fell within the 3-day period of her camping trip, but the seasonal variations in the images suggested they had been taken months apart. Jason submitted her GPS data, photographs, and detailed written account to Dr. Patricia Williamson, a geologist at Appalachian State University who specialized in studying unusual geological and magnetic phenomena in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Dr. Williamson reviewed the evidence and noted several features that were consistent with other unexplained incidents reported in the Grandfather Mountain area. According to Dr. Williamson's analysis, the region contains significant mineral deposits that can create localized magnetic anomalies capable of affecting electronic navigation equipment. However, the extent and nature of the anomalies described in Jason's case were beyond what could be explained by known geological factors. The photographs showing seasonal variations were particularly puzzling as they suggested either equipment malfunction or some form of temporal displacement that had no scientific explanation. The investigation also revealed that Jason's experience shared similarities with at least 4 other cases reported in the same general area over the past decade. All involved experienced solo hikers who became disoriented in ways that seemed inconsistent with their skill level, experienced unusual problems with navigation equipment, and reported memory gaps or inconsistencies that could not be explained by fatigue or environmental factors. Dr. Williamson noted that while the Grandfather Mountain area was known for challenging conditions that could affect even experienced hikers, the pattern of incidents suggested something beyond normal environmental hazards. She recommended additional research into the geological and electromagnetic properties of the region, as well as improved safety protocols for solo hikers in the affected areas. The psychological impact on Jason was significant, fundamentally altering her confidence in her navigation abilities and her willingness to undertake solo backpacking trips. Despite her extensive experience and technical training, the incident left her questioning her memory and perception in ways that affected her approach to wilderness travel. She began hiking exclusively with partners and avoided overnight trips in areas with reported navigation anomalies. In the months following her experience, Jason researched historical accounts of similar incidents in the Appalachian Mountains and discovered references to unexplained disorientation dating back to early European settlement. Native American oral traditions from the region also contain stories about places where travelers could become lost in time or space, suggesting that the phenomena she experienced might have a long history in the area. The case contributed to ongoing research into unexplained disappearances and disorientation incidents in the Appalachian region, though no definitive explanation has been established. The Grandfather Mountain State Park has since added additional warning signs about navigation difficulties and recommends that solo hikers carry redundant navigation equipment and emergency communication devices when exploring remote areas. To this day, Jason cannot fully explain what occurred during her 3-day camping trip. The combination of navigation anomalies, memory inconsistencies, and unexplained photographs suggests either a series of equipment failures that created a cascade of problems or some form of environmental phenomenon that science has not yet identified. The experience serves as a reminder that even experienced hikers can encounter situations that challenge their understanding of familiar environments. The investigation remains an active area of research, with scientists continuing to study the geological and electromagnetic properties of the Grandfather Mountain region in hopes of understanding the mechanisms behind these unusual incidents. Whether the phenomena represent natural processes that are not yet understood or something beyond current scientific explanation continues to be debated among researchers and outdoor safety experts. Sincere had been hunting the remote valleys and ridgelines of eastern Tennessee for 12 years, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather who had taught him to track deer, turkey, and other game throughout the Cumberland Mountains. As a 29-year-old machinist from Knoxville, he used his vacation time each autumn to pursue his passion for bow hunting in areas that required significant hiking to reach productive hunting locations. His preferred territories were the remote hollows accessible only by abandoned logging roads and unmarked trails where hunting pressure was minimal and wildlife populations remained robust. During the second week of November 2022, Sincere planned a 3-day solo bow hunting expedition to a secluded valley he had discovered the previous season in the Cherokee National Forest, approximately 15 miles southeast of Tellico Plains. The area featured a combination of hardwood ridges, dense rhododendron thickets, and small clearings created by old logging operations that provided ideal habitat for white-tailed deer. Most importantly, the location was far from established hunting areas and required a challenging 4-mile hike from the nearest Forest Service road. Sincere's equipment reflected his commitment to ethical hunting practices and wilderness safety. His compound bow was carefully tuned and sighted for hunting ranges up to 40 yards, accompanied by broadhead arrows designed for quick, humane kills. His backpack contained a portable tree stand, safety harness, scent elimination products, trail cameras, and field dressing supplies. He also carried standard wilderness survival gear, including first aid supplies, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, and a satellite messenger device for emergency communications. The trailhead for his hunting area was an unmarked pullout along Forest Service Road 345, where he parked his pickup truck at 4:30 a.m. on November 12th. The pre-dawn darkness was typical for early season hunting, allowing him to reach his hunting location and set up his equipment before deer became active at first light. The temperature was 38 degrees with clear skies and minimal wind, creating optimal conditions for bow hunting where scent control and silent movement were critical. The hike to his hunting area followed an old logging road that had been abandoned for over 20 years, allowing the forest to reclaim much of the corridor while still providing navigable access to the remote valley. The path wound through second-growth hardwood forest dominated by oak, hickory, and maple trees that had provided excellent mast crops for deer throughout the autumn. As he hiked, Sincere noted fresh deer sign, including tracks, droppings, and browse marks that indicated healthy wildlife activity in the area. At approximately 6:15 a.m., he reached the edge of the valley where he had planned to establish his hunting position. The location offered multiple deer trails converging near a small creek with mature oak trees providing both concealment and suitable anchor points for his tree stand. He selected a large white oak approximately 20 yards from the main deer crossing and began the process of installing his climbing stand while maintaining the quiet, methodical approach essential for successful hunting. As he prepared to climb into position, Sincere noticed an unusual smell carried on the morning breeze, a combination of wood smoke, chemical odors, and what seemed to be rotting meat. The scent was faint but persistent and did not match the normal forest smells he associated with the area. Initially, he attributed the odor to a possible dead animal or someone camping in the vicinity, but the chemical component suggested something more concerning than natural decomposition. From his elevated position in the tree stand, Sincere had an excellent view of the surrounding valley and could observe deer movement patterns while remaining concealed from ground-level detection. However, at approximately 7:20 a.m., he noticed activity in the distance that was clearly not wildlife. Through his binoculars, he observed two men moving through the forest, carrying what appeared to be heavy equipment, including tarps, rope, and metal containers. Their movement was purposeful and coordinated, suggesting familiarity with the terrain and a specific destination. The men were approximately 300 yards away, moving along what appeared to be an animal trail that led deeper into the valley toward the source of the unusual odors. They were dressed in camouflage hunting clothing, but carried no visible hunting weapons or equipment. Instead, their gear suggested some form of processing or concealment activity that was inconsistent with legal hunting or camping. Sincere documented their direction of travel and estimated their position relative to his own location. 20 minutes later, a third individual appeared following the same route as the first two men. This person was carrying additional equipment, including what looked like camping chairs, propane tanks, and a large cooler. The systematic transport of equipment suggested an established operation rather than casual use of the forest. Most concerning was the deliberate effort to avoid established trails and clearings, indicating awareness that their activities should not be observed by other forest users. At 8:10 a.m., Sincere heard the sound of a generator starting in the direction where he had seen the men disappearing. The mechanical noise was completely inappropriate for the remote forest setting and clearly indicated some form of powered operation that required investigation. As an experienced hunter familiar with legal and ethical forest use, he recognized that the combination of unusual odors, secretive behavior, and powered equipment suggested illegal activity that warranted reporting to authorities. Rather than immediately leaving his hunting position, Sincere decided to observe and document the situation to provide detailed information to law enforcement. He used his cell phone to record GPS coordinates, take photographs of the men and equipment, and note specific details about their activities and movements. However, the remote location provided no cell phone coverage, meaning he would need to hike back to his vehicle to contact authorities. The decision to investigate further proved to be critical. At 8:45 a.m., while observing through binoculars, he witnessed activity that clearly indicated serious criminal behavior. The three men were joined by two additional individuals who arrived carrying what appeared to be heavy bundles wrapped in tarps. The bundles were cylindrical and approximately 6 feet in length, handled with the care and effort that suggested significant weight and fragility. From his elevated position, Sincere could observe the men unwrapping and examining the contents of the bundles, though the distance and forest canopy prevented him from identifying specific details. However, Their behavior and the systematic nature of their processing activities suggested they were handling materials that required careful documentation and preparation. The presence of metal containers, cutting tools, and cleaning supplies strongly indicated some form of illegal processing operation. Most disturbing was the discovery that the operation involved far more people than he had initially observed. Over the course of 30 minutes, he counted at least 7 different individuals moving through the area, some arriving with additional equipment, while others departed carrying processed materials. The level of organization and coordination indicated an established criminal enterprise rather than opportunistic illegal activity. At 9:30 a.m., Sincere made the decision to quietly withdraw from his hunting position and return to his vehicle to contact law enforcement. The criminal activity he had witnessed clearly posed a threat to public safety and required immediate professional response. However, as he began to quietly disassemble his tree stand, he heard voices approaching his location from the direction of the illegal operation. 2 men were moving along the deer trail that passed directly beneath his tree stand, engaged in conversation that immediately revealed the nature of their criminal activities. They were discussing the processing and transportation of what they referred to as product, using terminology that clearly indicated involvement in drug manufacturing and distribution. More concerning were references to disposal activities and the need to clean up evidence from previous operations. From their conversation, Sincere learned that the group had been using the remote valley for over 2 years as a processing location for methamphetamine production and body disposal related to drug trafficking operations. The isolated location provided security from law enforcement detection while offering vehicle access through abandoned logging roads and multiple escape routes through the National Forest Trail system. Most chilling was their discussion of previous encounters with hunters and hikers who had discovered their operation. The men spoke casually about handling problems and ensuring that nobody makes it back to report what they saw. Their conversation included specific references to missing persons cases in the region and methods they used to eliminate witnesses to their criminal activities. Realizing that his own safety was in immediate danger, Sincere remained motionless in his tree stand while the 2 men passed directly beneath his position. He was equipped with hunting weapons, but understood that any attempt to defend himself against multiple armed criminals would likely result in his death. His best chance for survival was to remain undetected until he could safely withdraw and contact authorities. However, as the men moved away from his position, one of them noticed the disturbed ground where Sincere had installed his tree stand. The hunter's careful approach had minimized his impact, but the sharp eyes of individuals experienced in avoiding detection quickly identified signs of recent human presence. Within minutes, both men returned to investigate the area more thoroughly. The investigation led them to discover Sincere's presence in the tree despite his camouflage position and motionless behavior. At this point, confrontation became unavoidable, and his survival depended on quick thinking and decisive action. The criminals were armed with handguns and immediately demanded that he climb down from the tree while threatening to shoot if he attempted to flee or call for help. Detective Rachel Barnes of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation explained that the organization represented a sophisticated criminal enterprise that specifically targeted remote public lands for illegal operations. The group recruited individuals with extensive outdoor experience and local knowledge to identify locations that provided security from law enforcement while remaining accessible for transportation and supply operations. The criminals had developed detailed protocols for handling encounters with outdoor recreationists, ranging from intimidation and misdirection to kidnapping and murder, depending on the perceived threat level. Sincere's hunting experience and physical conditioning proved crucial during the escape that followed. As he climbed down from the tree, he deliberately dropped his heavy backpack to distract the men while simultaneously activating the emergency beacon on his satellite messenger device. The distraction provided enough time for him to reach ground level and move toward denser forest cover before the criminals could effectively pursue. The chase that followed lasted approximately 45 minutes as Sincere used his knowledge of the terrain and hunting skills to evade multiple pursuers through difficult forest conditions. His familiarity with deer trails, creek crossings, and natural concealment allowed him to maintain distance from his pursuers while moving toward the logging road where his vehicle was parked. However, The criminals' familiarity with the area and their coordination through two-way radios made escape increasingly difficult. Relief came when Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency officers responded to his emergency beacon activation and intercepted him as he reached the logging road. Officer James Mitchell and Conservation Officer Sarah Thompson had been conducting routine patrol activities in the area when they received the emergency alert through dispatch services. They immediately secured Sincere's safety and called for backup to investigate the criminal operation he had reported. The law enforcement response involved multiple agencies, including the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Drug Enforcement Administration, and Cherokee National Forest law enforcement officers. A coordinated operation was conducted over the following 3 days, resulting in the arrest of 12 individuals involved in the drug manufacturing and trafficking operation, including the 7 people Sincere had observed at the remote processing site. The investigation revealed that the criminal organization had been using the remote valley for over 3 years as a primary methamphetamine production facility and body disposal site. The isolated location provided security from detection while offering multiple transportation routes through the National Forest Road system. Evidence recovered from the site included extensive drug manufacturing equipment, weapons, and human remains from at least 4 individuals who had been murdered to protect the operation. Most significantly, the investigation solved several missing persons cases in the region, including the disappearances of 2 hunters and a hiker who had vanished while recreating in the Cherokee National Forest. Forensic evidence confirmed that these individuals had encountered the criminal operation and been killed to prevent them from reporting their discoveries to authorities. Their bodies had been disposed of using methods that made discovery nearly impossible without specific knowledge of the burial locations. Sincere's survival was attributed to his immediate recognition of danger, his decision to document the situation rather than confront the criminals, and his use of emergency communication equipment that enabled rapid law enforcement response. The case resulted in federal charges against all 12 defendants, including charges for drug manufacturing, weapons violations, murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. Several defendants received life sentences without possibility of parole, while others received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years in federal prison. The investigation also led to the identification and prosecution of additional criminal organizations operating in remote areas throughout eastern Tennessee. Following the incident, Sincere worked with law enforcement agencies and hunting organizations to develop safety protocols for hunters and other outdoor recreationists who might encounter criminal activities in remote areas. His experience highlighted the importance of carrying emergency communication equipment, documenting suspicious activities, and prioritizing personal safety over investigation when encountering potentially dangerous situations. The Cherokee National Forest implemented enhanced patrol activities in remote areas and established better communication systems for reporting suspicious activities. Warning signs were posted at trailheads advising outdoor recreationists about the risks of encountering illegal operations and providing emergency contact information for reporting crimes in progress. The psychological impact on Sincere was significant, fundamentally changing his approach to solo hunting despite his extensive experience and wilderness skills. He now hunts exclusively with partners and avoids areas with histories of criminal activity, regardless of their hunting potential. He has become an advocate for outdoor safety education, particularly focusing on helping hunters recognize and respond appropriately to dangerous situations in remote areas. The case demonstrated that criminal organizations actively seek to exploit the isolation and limited law enforcement presence in remote public lands for illegal activities. The sophisticated nature of the operation, including protocols for handling witnesses and detailed knowledge of forest access routes, indicated significant investment in developing secure operating procedures that could continue for extended periods without detection. Detective Barnes noted that drug manufacturing operations often target remote public lands because they provide isolation, multiple escape routes, and limited regular patrol presence that reduces the risk of discovery. The combination of difficult access and infrequent visitor traffic creates opportunities for criminals to operate with reduced concern about detection by law enforcement or the general public. To this day, Sincere credits his survival to recognizing the danger immediately and prioritizing escape over confrontation. His decision to activate his emergency beacon while still at risk provided law enforcement with the real-time information necessary to mount an effective response, and ultimately led to the resolution of multiple serious crimes that had remained unsolved for years. Crew had volunteered with the Virginia Department of Forestry Trail Maintenance Program for 8 years, spending countless weekends clearing debris, repairing bridges, and maintaining signage throughout the remote sections of the George Washington National Forest. As a 35-year-old carpenter from Harrisonburg, he possessed both the physical skills and technical knowledge necessary for backcountry maintenance work that required hiking into areas inaccessible by vehicles. His assignments typically involved solo work on unmarked trails and abandoned forest roads where his carpentry expertise was essential for structural repairs. In early September 2023, Crew was assigned to conduct maintenance on a section of the Wild Oak Trail system approximately 8 miles southwest of Staunton, in an area known for its challenging terrain and infrequent visitor traffic. The work order specified repairs to 3 wooden footbridges that had been damaged during spring flooding, replacement of missing trail markers, and removal of fallen trees blocking access to several connecting trails. The project was expected to require 3 days of work, necessitating solo camping in the remote forest area. Crew's equipment reflected his dual role as both trail maintenance specialist and backcountry camper. His truck contained professional tools, including chainsaw, handsaws, drill, hardware supplies, and materials for bridge repair, along with standard camping gear for extended forest work. His personal equipment included a lightweight tent, sleeping bag, camping stove, and 3 days of supplies, as well as emergency communication devices required for solo Forest Service work. The work area was accessed via Forest Service Road 42, a gravel road that terminated at a small parking area serving as the trailhead for several interconnected trail systems. When he arrived at 7:30 a.m. on September 8th, the parking area was empty, which was typical for weekday access to this remote section of the forest. The trail register showed minimal recent activity with only 2 entries from the previous month, both from experienced hikers familiar with the challenging terrain. The first day of work proceeded according to schedule as Crew hiked approximately 2 miles along the Wild Oak Trail to reach the damaged bridges. The trail passed through mature hardwood forest dominated by oak, maple, and hickory trees with occasional clearings created by past logging operations that provided habitat for diverse wildlife populations. The bridges were located at stream crossings in a narrow valley where spring flooding had undermined support structures and washed away sections of the wooden decking. After establishing his work site and assessing the required repairs, Crew set up his camp approximately 50 yards from the first bridge location in a level area that provided access to clean water while remaining clear of potential flood zones. The location offered the security and convenience necessary for extended work projects, while maintaining the isolation required for undisturbed forest maintenance activities. The repair work was physically demanding but routine, involving the removal of damaged materials, excavation of new foundation points, and installation of replacement structures using hand tools and materials he had transported from his vehicle. By late afternoon, he had completed repairs to the first bridge and begun preparation work for the second location. The forest remained quiet throughout the day, with only typical wildlife sounds and the normal environmental noises associated with working in remote woodland areas. As evening approached, Crew prepared dinner while reviewing his work plan for the following day. The forest sounds around his campsite were consistent with his extensive experience in Virginia wilderness areas, including the calls of various bird species, the movement of small mammals through the underbrush, and the occasional distant sound of larger animals moving through the forest. He retired to his tent at approximately 9:15 p.m., satisfied with his progress and anticipating completion of the project within the scheduled time frame. The first unusual incident occurred at 11:40 p.m. when Crew was awakened by what sounded like someone calling his name from a distance. The voice was distinctly human and male and seemed to originate from the direction of the trail he had followed to reach his work site. Initially, he assumed another Forest Service worker or hiker had arrived late and was attempting to locate his camp. Though the timing was unusual for such activity, he responded by calling out, "Over here, by the bridge," while emerging from his tent with his headlamp to signal his location. However, There was no response to his call, and he could see no lights or movement in the direction from which the voice had seemed to come. After waiting several minutes for additional communication, he assumed the caller had either not heard his response or had moved away from the area. 20 minutes later, the calling resumed, but this time from a different direction and with a voice that sounded exactly like his own. The mimic was calling, "Hello, anyone out there?" in precisely his own tone, accent, and speech patterns. The replication was so accurate that if he had not been alone, he might have assumed someone was playing back a recording of his own voice taken from earlier in the evening. The phenomenon continued intermittently throughout the night, with the mysterious caller using various voices and phrases that seemed designed to elicit responses. At 12:30 a.m., the voice called, "Help me, I'm lost," using what sounded like the voice of a young woman in distress. At 1:15 a.m., it called, "Crew, where are you?" in a voice that sounded exactly like his supervisor from the forestry department. At 2 a.m., it used his own voice again to call, "Is anyone else hearing this?" Each incident followed the same pattern, a call that seemed designed to encourage investigation or response, followed by complete silence when crew attempted to communicate back. The voices originated from different locations around his campsite, always from areas where the darkness and forest terrain made visual confirmation impossible. Most disturbing was the perfect accuracy of the vocal replications, which included not only tone and accent, but also specific speech patterns and phrasing that suggested detailed knowledge of the individuals being mimicked. By 3 a.m., crew had become convinced that he was experiencing some form of deliberate harassment or psychological manipulation rather than coincidental encounters with other forest users. The systematic nature of the incidents, the impossible accuracy of the vocal mimicry, and the strategic timing suggested either sophisticated technology or something beyond normal human capabilities. Rather than investigating the source of the voices, he remained in his tent and documented each incident in detail, including approximate times, directions, and exact phrases used. His forestry training emphasized the importance of maintaining accurate records during unusual incidents, both for safety reporting and potential law enforcement investigation. However, his remote location provided no cell phone coverage for immediate communication with supervisors or emergency services. The second day of work began normally with no unusual incidents during daylight hours. Crew completed repairs to the second bridge and began work on the third location while remaining alert for any continuation of the previous night's phenomena. The forest environment seemed completely normal during daylight, with typical wildlife activity and no signs of human presence other than his own work activities. However, as he worked on the final bridge repair, he began to notice additional evidence that suggested his campsite had been visited during his absence. Small items in his camp had been moved or rearranged in ways that were subtle but noticeable to someone familiar with his organizational habits. His water bottles were arranged differently than he had left them. His camp chair had been moved several inches from its original position, and his tools were organized in a different pattern than his standard practice. More concerning was the discovery of footprints around his campsite that were not his own. The prints were adult-sized, appeared fresh, and showed a pattern of movement that suggested someone had systematically examined his equipment and supplies while he was working at the bridge locations. However, the prints were unusual in that they showed no clear heel or toe impressions, appearing more like smudges or impressions made by something attempting to simulate human footprints. That evening, the vocal phenomena resumed with increased intensity and sophistication. The mimic began using voices that crew recognized as belonging to specific individuals from his past, including family members, former coworkers, and friends he had not seen in years. The accuracy extended beyond vocal characteristics to include personal details and speech patterns that would be impossible for a stranger to replicate without extensive knowledge of his personal history. At 8:20 p.m., the entity used his deceased father's voice to call, "Son, come help me with this," a phrase his father had used frequently during Crew's childhood when they worked on construction projects together. At 9:15 p.m., it used his ex-wife's voice to call, "Crew, we need to talk about something important," delivered in the exact tone she had used during their divorce proceedings 5 years earlier. Most unsettling was the entity's use of the voice of Maria Santos, a fellow forestry worker who had disappeared while conducting solo maintenance work in Shenandoah National Park 3 years earlier. Her body had never been found despite extensive search efforts, and her case remained an active missing person investigation. The mimic used her voice to call, "I found something you need to see. Come help me," a phrase that was consistent with her work-related communication style, but created profound psychological distress given the circumstances of her disappearance. The incidents continued throughout the night with increasing frequency, using voices from throughout Crue's personal and professional history. The entity demonstrated detailed knowledge not only of how these individuals sounded, but also of their relationships with him, their communication patterns, and specific phrases they had used in past conversations. The level of detail suggested access to information that should have been impossible for any external observer to obtain. By dawn, Crew had documented over 20 separate incidents involving at least 15 different voices. The pattern suggested that the entity was systematically attempting to manipulate him psychologically using voices of people who held emotional significance in his life to encourage him to leave his secure position and investigate the source of the calls. The strategic nature of the vocal selections indicated intelligence and planning rather than random or opportunistic behavior. On his final day, rather than completing the remaining trail maintenance work, Crew made the decision to pack his equipment and return to his vehicle immediately. The psychological stress of the incidents combined with evidence that his campsite was being monitored and visited created safety concerns that outweighed his commitment to completing the assigned work. He documented his decision and the reasons for early departure in his official Forestry Service report. However, as he hiked back toward his vehicle, the phenomena followed him. The entity continued calling from various directions along the trail, using different voices to attempt to encourage him to leave the marked path. At one point, it used his supervisor's voice to call Crew, "Take the shortcut through the hollow. It'll save you an hour," directing him toward an unmarked route that would have led away from the established trail system. The most disturbing incident occurred as he neared the parking area. The entity began using the voice of Maria Santos again, but this time calling Crew, "Don't leave. I'm trapped here. I need your help to get out." The call seemed to originate from a dense thicket approximately 50 yards off the main trail in an area that would be extremely difficult to navigate and search effectively. Despite the psychological pressure created by hearing his missing colleague's voice calling for help, Crew's training and instincts warned him against investigation. The strategic timing of the calls, their location in difficult terrain, and the pattern of manipulation he had experienced over the previous 2 days suggested a trap rather than a genuine emergency. He continued hiking toward his vehicle while documenting the incident for his official report. When Crew reached the parking area, he discovered that his truck had been visited during his absence. The vehicle was unlocked despite his clear memory of locking it, and items in the cab had been moved or rearranged. Most concerning was the discovery that his emergency radio had been turned on and tuned to a frequency that was receiving intermittent transmissions in voices he recognized from the forest incidents. He immediately drove to the nearest location with cell phone coverage and contacted his Forestry Service supervisor to report the incidents and request immediate assistance. Supervisor Janet Williams took his report seriously and initiated contact with both Virginia State Police and the FBI unit that investigates missing persons cases in national forest areas. The investigation that followed revealed that Crew's experience was not unique. Over the previous 5 years, at least 6 other forestry workers and hikers had reported similar incidents involving vocal mimicry in remote areas of the George Washington National Forest. Most reports involved voices of missing persons from the region, including Maria Santos and 4 other individuals who had disappeared while hiking or working alone in the forest. FBI Special Agent David Richardson, who specialized in missing persons cases involving national forest areas, explained that the incidents represented either sophisticated criminal activity designed to lure victims into isolated areas or some form of unexplained phenomenon that remained beyond current investigative capabilities. The consistent reports of vocal mimicry, the specific use of missing persons' voices, and the strategic behavior patterns suggested intelligence and planning that raised serious safety concerns. The investigation also revealed that several of the missing persons cases in the region shared similarities with Crew's experience. Multiple missing individuals had made cell phone calls or sent text messages shortly before their disappearances, reporting that they heard familiar voices calling for help and were leaving marked trails to investigate. The pattern suggested that the vocal mimicry phenomenon might be connected to the disappearances rather than being a separate occurrence. Following the investigation, the Virginia Department of Forestry implemented new safety protocols for solo work in remote forest areas. These included mandatory use of GPS tracking devices, regular check-in schedules with supervisors, and specific instructions to never leave marked trails in response to calls for help, regardless of how familiar the voices might sound. Crew was reassigned to trail maintenance work that could be completed by teams rather than solo workers, and he was provided with psychological counseling to address the trauma created by hearing his deceased father's voice and the voice of his missing colleague. The incident fundamentally changed his approach to forest work and his understanding of the potential dangers present in remote wilderness areas. The case remains active as part of the broader investigation into missing persons incidents in Virginia's national forest areas. The vocal mimicry phenomenon continues to be reported occasionally, with each incident carefully documented and investigated by federal authorities. Whether the incidents represent criminal activity, unknown wildlife behavior, or unexplained environmental phenomena continues to be debated among investigators and researchers. To this day, Crew cannot explain the source or mechanism behind the vocal mimicry he experienced. The perfect replication of voices from his personal history, including individuals who had been deceased for years or missing for extended periods, suggests capabilities that exceed known technology or natural phenomena. The experience serves as a warning to outdoor workers and recreationists about the importance of remaining skeptical of unexpected calls for help in remote areas, regardless of how familiar the voices might sound. Jury had been exploring Pennsylvania's extensive trail network for 9 years with a particular focus on the lesser-known loop trails scattered throughout the state's forests and wild areas. As a 33-year-old geography teacher from Philadelphia, she combined her professional interest in spatial relationships with her passion for solo hiking, often spending weekends documenting trail conditions and mapping features for online hiking communities. Her experience included successful completion of dozens of loop trails ranging from short-day hikes to multi-day backpacking circuits throughout the Pennsylvania wilds. In mid-November 2022, she planned to explore a recently discovered loop trail in the Quehana Wild area of north-central Pennsylvania, approximately 12 miles southeast of St. Mary's. The trail had been mentioned in an obscure forestry report as an unmarked loop that connected several abandoned logging roads with game trails, creating a roughly 8-mile circuit through remote forest that received minimal visitor traffic. The route promised challenging terrain, excellent solitude, and the opportunity to document a previously unrecorded trail system. Jury's equipment reflected her dual role as both experienced hiker and amateur cartographer. Her daypack contained GPS devices with offline topographic maps, compass, altimeter, trail measuring wheel, and digital camera for documenting trail features and conditions. She also carried standard day hiking supplies including water, high-energy food, first aid kit, emergency shelter, and headlamp, along with extra batteries and backup navigation equipment essential for exploring unmarked trails in remote areas. The trailhead was accessed via a primitive forest road that branched off from Route 555 near the southern boundary of the Quehana Wild area. According to her research, the loop could be accessed from a small parking area that served as the starting point for several unmarked hunting and fishing trails. When she arrived at 8:30 a.m. on November 18th, the parking area was empty, which was typical for late-season hiking in this remote region where most recreational activity occurred during warmer months. The trail began as a well-defined path that followed an old logging road through mixed hardwood forest dominated by oak, maple, and cherry trees. The route was clearly marked by occasional blazes and showed evidence of regular use by hunters and wildlife management personnel. After approximately 2 miles, the trail diverged from the logging road and began following what appeared to be a combination of game trails and abandoned Forest Service routes that wound through more challenging terrain. The forest environment was typical of Pennsylvania's northern hardwood region in late autumn, with bare trees allowing excellent visibility and a thick layer of fallen leaves covering the forest floor. Wildlife sign was abundant, including tracks from deer, turkey, and small mammals, indicating a healthy ecosystem undisturbed by heavy human activity. The terrain featured rolling hills with moderate elevation changes, scattered rock outcroppings, and several small streams that required careful navigation. At approximately 10:15 a.m., Jury reached what appeared to be the halfway point of the loop. According to her GPS readings and distance measurements, the location was marked by a distinctive rock formation that served as a natural landmark, and she stopped to document the area with photographs and detailed notes about trail conditions and navigation features. Her GPS showed that she had traveled approximately 4 miles from the trailhead, which was consistent with her expectations for the 8-mile loop. However, as she continued following the trail from the rock formation, she began to notice inconsistencies in her navigation readings. The trail seemed to be leading her in directions that did not align with her GPS track or the general orientation she expected for completing the loop. Her compass readings showed that she was traveling northeast rather than the northwest direction that should have led her back toward the trailhead. After hiking for another hour, Jury reached a familiar-looking area that seemed identical to terrain she had passed earlier in the day. The tree formations, rock outcroppings, and stream crossings matched her memories and photographs from approximately 2 hours earlier, despite her GPS indicating that she had traveled over 2 miles in the correct direction. Most puzzling was the discovery of her own footprints in a muddy area near a stream crossing that she distinctly remembered documenting earlier in her hike. Concerned about possible navigation errors, she stopped to carefully review her GPS data and compare her current position with her planned route. According to her devices, she was located approximately 6 miles from the trailhead and should be approaching the final segment of the loop that would lead her back to the parking area. However, the terrain around her was clearly the same area where she had stopped for her halfway break, including the distinctive rock formation that she had photographed and carefully documented. More disturbing was the realization that her GPS was showing inconsistent readings even when she remained stationary. The coordinates would fluctuate by several hundred yards over the course of minutes despite clear sky conditions and strong satellite reception. Her backup GPS device showed similar anomalies, suggesting either widespread equipment failure or some form of environmental interference that was affecting electronic navigation equipment. Rather than continuing to follow the trail, Jury decided to use direct compass navigation to hike toward what should be the general direction of the trailhead. She identified a prominent ridge line to the southwest that, according to her topographic maps, should provide a clear route back to the forest road and parking area. However, after hiking for 45 minutes in a straight line according to her compass, she found herself once again at the distinctive rock formation where she had taken her halfway break. The repeated return to the same location despite traveling in different directions suggested either severe disorientation or some form of spatial anomaly that was affecting her ability to navigate away from the area. She documented each attempt with photographs and GPS readings, noting that her electronic devices continued to show inconsistent and impossible readings that suggested she was moving significant distances while actually returning to the same physical location. At this point, Jury began to experience increasing anxiety about her situation. Despite 9 years of hiking experience and extensive navigation training, she found herself unable to leave an area that appeared to be no more than a few hundred yards in diameter. Every trail, compass bearing, and GPS route she attempted led her back to the same rock formation within approximately 1 hour of hiking time. The phenomenon became more pronounced as the day progressed. She attempted to mark her route by leaving small cairns and tying bright surveyor's tape to trees along her path, but discovered that these markers would disappear or relocate to different positions during her attempts to navigate away from the central area. At one point, she found surveyor's tape that she had placed on trees during her first attempt to leave the area, but it was now attached to completely different trees and locations where she had no memory of placing it. Most unsettling was the discovery that time seemed to be behaving inconsistently during her navigation attempts. According to her watch, she had been hiking for over 8 hours since leaving the trailhead, but the sun's position in the sky suggested that only 4 or 5 hours had passed since morning. Her GPS devices showed timestamps that were inconsistent with both her watch and her estimation of elapsed time, creating additional confusion about the duration and distance of her various attempts to escape the area. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Juri made the decision to prepare for an unplanned overnight stay rather than continuing to attempt navigation in conditions that seemed to be deteriorating. She had sufficient supplies for emergency shelter and could survive overnight if necessary. But the prospect of spending the night in an area where normal navigation rules seemed to be suspended created significant psychological stress. However, her preparation for overnight camping revealed additional anomalies. When she attempted to find a suitable campsite near the rock formation, she discovered that the terrain around the landmark seemed to change depending on the direction from which she approached it. Features such as streams, fallen logs, and suitable camping areas would appear and disappear based on her angle of approach, creating a constantly shifting landscape that defied consistent observation. The most disturbing incident occurred as darkness approached. While gathering deadfall wood for an emergency signal fire, she encountered her own daypack sitting beside a tree approximately 50 yards from where she had left it near the rock formation. The pack contained all of her supplies and equipment, arranged exactly as she had organized them, but she had no memory of moving the pack or visiting that particular location during her attempts to navigate away from the area. When she returned to retrieve her original pack from near the rock formation, it was no longer there. However, the pack she had found in the forest contained not only all of her original supplies, but also additional items that she did not recognize, including extra food, water, and camping equipment that appeared to be identical to her own gear, but showed different patterns of wear and use. At this point, Juri activated the emergency beacon on her GPS device and attempted to contact search and rescue services. However, despite showing strong satellite signal strength, the device failed to transmit her distress signal or establish communication with emergency services. Her attempts to use her cell phone similarly failed despite showing adequate signal strength, with all calls failing to connect and text messages failing to send. As full darkness arrived, she established an emergency shelter using her bivy sack and prepared to spend the night in the area. However, sleep proved impossible due to continued spatial anomalies that became more pronounced in darkness. When she used her headlamp to navigate around her shelter, familiar landmarks would appear in different locations than she had observed during daylight hours, creating a constantly changing environment that made orientation impossible. The most significant relief came at approximately 3 a.m. when she was awakened by the sound of voices calling her name. A search and rescue team from the Pennsylvania Game Commission had been alerted to her overdue return by her emergency contact and had mobilized teams to search the Quehana Wild area. The rescue team was able to locate her using standard GPS coordinates, but reported that their navigation equipment had also experienced unusual readings while approaching her location. Game Warden Michael Torres, who led the rescue team, confirmed that they had experienced similar navigation difficulties while searching for her. Their GPS units had shown inconsistent readings, and several team members had become temporarily separated despite following standard search protocols. The team had eventually located her through traditional compass navigation and by following the sound of her emergency whistle rather than relying on electronic navigation equipment. The hike back to the trailhead with the rescue team proceeded normally, taking approximately 2.5 hours over terrain that was consistent with standard topographic maps and GPS readings. However, when they reached the parking area, Juri's vehicle was not in the location where she had left it. Instead, it was parked in a different spot with no explanation for how it had been moved, and her keys were found inside the unlocked vehicle, despite her clear memory of keeping them with her throughout the hiking attempt. Following the rescue, Juri underwent medical evaluation to rule out dehydration, hypothermia, or other conditions that might have contributed to disorientation. All medical tests were normal, and she showed no signs of physical or psychological conditions that would explain the navigation anomalies she had experienced. Her GPS devices and other electronic equipment were tested by technical specialists and found to be functioning within normal parameters. Game Warden Torres filed a detailed incident report that noted the unusual nature of the navigation problems experienced by both the victim and the rescue team. His report recommended additional investigation of potential environmental factors in the Quehana Wild area that might affect electronic navigation equipment. including possible magnetic anomalies or electromagnetic interference from unknown sources. The investigation revealed that Jury's experience was not unique in the Quehana region. Over the previous 5 years, at least 3 other hikers had reported similar incidents involving navigation equipment failures and apparent spatial displacement while hiking in remote areas of the wild area. However, none of the previous reports had been as thoroughly documented or involved search and rescue response that could corroborate the unusual phenomena. Dr. Patricia Williams, a geologist from Penn State University who specialized in studying unusual geological formations in Pennsylvania, reviewed the incident reports and noted several factors that might contribute to navigation anomalies in the region. The Quehana Wild Area contains significant mineral deposits, including uranium and other materials that could potentially affect magnetic compass readings and electronic navigation equipment. However, Dr. Williams acknowledged that the extent and nature of the anomalies described in the incident reports exceeded what could be explained by known geological factors. The apparent spatial displacement and time distortion effects suggested phenomena that were beyond current scientific understanding, requiring additional research to identify potential explanations or mechanisms. Following her experience, Jury discontinued solo hiking in remote areas and now hikes exclusively with partners who carry redundant navigation equipment. She has shared her experience with hiking organizations and search and rescue teams to help develop better protocols for dealing with navigation emergencies in areas where electronic equipment may be unreliable. The Pennsylvania Game Commission has since added warning signs at trailheads in the Quehana Wild Area, advising hikers about potential navigation difficulties and recommending the use of multiple navigation methods, including traditional compass and map techniques. The Commission also established improved communication protocols for search and rescue operations in areas where electronic equipment reliability may be compromised. The case remains an active area of research for scientists studying unexplained phenomena in Pennsylvania's wilderness areas. Whether the incidents represent previously unknown geological processes, equipment failures under specific environmental conditions, or phenomena that science has not yet identified continues to be investigated by researchers from multiple disciplines. To this day, Jury cannot fully explain what occurred during her attempted loop hike in the Quehana Wild Area. The combination of navigation equipment failures, spatial displacement, and time distortion effects suggests either a complex series of coincidental problems or some form of environmental phenomenon that affected her perception and navigation abilities in ways that remain unexplained by current scientific understanding. The experience serves as a reminder that even experienced hikers with proper equipment and training can encounter situations in remote wilderness areas that challenge their understanding of familiar environments and navigation principles. The importance of carrying redundant navigation systems, informing others about hiking plans, and maintaining emergency communication capabilities became even more apparent following this incident. Jovi had been passionate about geology and cave exploration for 11 years, pursuing her master's degree in geological sciences at West Virginia University while spending weekends exploring the extensive cave systems scattered throughout the Appalachian region. As a 26-year-old graduate student from Charleston, she combined her academic research with her love of spelunking, often conducting solo surveys of unmapped cave systems to document geological formations and mineral deposits for her thesis on Appalachian karst topography. In early October 2021, Jovi received information about an unexplored cave system in a remote section of the Monongahela National Forest approximately 18 miles northeast of Elkins. The cave had been mentioned in a 1960s geological survey as a significant limestone formation with potential for extensive underground development, but no modern exploration or mapping had been conducted. Local cavers referred to it as Hidden Springs Cave due to the underground stream that emerged from its entrance during periods of heavy rainfall. Jovi's equipment reflected her dual expertise in geology and cave exploration. Her underground gear included a helmet with multiple light sources, backup batteries, rope and climbing hardware, emergency bivy equipment, and instruments for measuring cave dimensions and geological features. Her geological equipment included rock hammers, sample containers, pH testing kits for water analysis, and a waterproof camera for documenting formations and mineral deposits. The cave entrance was located in a narrow valley accessible only by an abandoned logging road that required a 2-mile hike through dense forest. According to her topographic maps, the cave was situated in a limestone formation that suggested potential for significant underground chambers and passages. When she arrived at the trailhead at 9 a.m. on October 12th, the area was completely deserted with no evidence of recent human activity or vehicle traffic on the overgrown access road. The hike to the cave entrance followed an old Forest Service trail that had been abandoned for over 20 years, allowing natural vegetation to reclaim much of the pathway. The terrain was challenging, featuring steep slopes, creek crossings, and dense rhododendron thickets that required careful navigation. As she approached the cave location, the forest became noticeably quieter with an absence of normal wildlife, sounds that she initially attributed to the limestone geology affecting local ecosystem conditions. The cave entrance was larger than she had expected based on the historical descriptions, measuring approximately 12 feet wide and 8 feet high at its highest point. A small stream emerged from the cave during dry conditions, indicating active underground water flow and suggesting that the cave system might be extensive. The entrance area showed minimal evidence of previous human visitation, with only faint traces of old campfire rings and discarded equipment that appeared to date from decades earlier. Jovi began her exploration using standard cave survey techniques, measuring distances and angles while documenting the cave's geological features with photographs and detailed notes. The entrance passage extended approximately 50 yards before opening into a large chamber roughly 30 feet in diameter with a ceiling height of 15 feet. The chamber featured typical limestone formations including stalactites, flowstone deposits, and evidence of water level changes over geological time periods. However, as she explored deeper into the cave system, she began to notice features that were inconsistent with natural cave formations. In a side passage approximately 100 yards from the entrance, she discovered what appeared to be carved niches in the limestone walls. The niches were roughly rectangular, measuring about 2 feet wide by 6 feet long, and appeared to have been created by human tools rather than natural water erosion. More disturbing was the discovery of bone fragments scattered throughout this section of the cave. Initially, she assumed the bones were from animals that had died naturally in the cave or been brought in by predators. However, closer examination revealed that many of the bones showed evidence of deliberate cutting and processing with tool marks that indicated human activity rather than natural decomposition or animal predation. The bone deposits were extensive, scattered throughout multiple chambers and passages in patterns that suggested systematic placement rather than accidental accumulation. Some bones appeared to be very old, showing the brown coloration and brittle texture associated with decades or centuries of aging in cave environments. Others appeared much more recent, showing less discoloration and retaining structural integrity that suggested recent deposition. Most concerning was the discovery of human bone fragments mixed among what appeared to be animal remains. Jovi's undergraduate training in anatomy allowed her to identify several fragments that were clearly human, including portions of skulls, long bones, and teeth that showed characteristics inconsistent with natural death or burial. Many of the human bones showed evidence of deliberate cutting and processing similar to the animal remains. As she documented the bone deposits with photographs and GPS coordinates, Jovi began to realize that she had discovered evidence of serious criminal activity rather than an interesting geological formation. The systematic nature of the bone deposits, the evidence of deliberate processing, and the mixture of human and animal remains suggested that the cave was being used as a disposal site for activities that warranted immediate law enforcement investigation. The scope of the bone deposits became apparent as she explored additional passages and chambers throughout the cave system. Every major chamber contained evidence of bone disposal, with some areas showing stratified layers that suggested decades of continuous use. The volume of remains was far beyond what could be explained by occasional criminal activity, indicating a long-term systematic operation that had been using the cave for disposal purposes over an extended period. Most disturbing was the discovery of a chamber that appeared to be specifically configured for processing activities. This area contained metal tables, cutting implements, and containers that had been arranged to facilitate the systematic processing of materials before disposal in other areas of the cave. The processing area showed evidence of regular use with fresh stains and recently used equipment that indicated ongoing criminal activity. In this processing chamber, Jovi found personal items that clearly belonged to missing persons, including wallets, identification documents, jewelry, and clothing items that had been stripped from victims before processing. Among the identification documents were driver's licenses and other items belonging to individuals who had been reported missing throughout West Virginia and surrounding states over the past several years. The realization that she had discovered an active crime scene created immediate safety concerns. The processing equipment showed evidence of recent use, indicating that the perpetrators might return to the cave at any time. Additionally, the systematic nature of the operation suggested that multiple individuals were involved, creating the potential for dangerous confrontation if she was discovered at the site. Rather than continuing her exploration, Jovi immediately began the process of documenting the crime scene and preparing to contact law enforcement. She photographed the bone deposits, processing equipment, and personal items while being careful not to disturb evidence that might be crucial for criminal investigation. She also recorded GPS coordinates for all significant discoveries and created detailed maps of the cave system to assist law enforcement response. However, as she prepared to leave the cave and contact authorities, she heard voices and equipment sounds coming from the direction of the cave entrance. Multiple individuals were approaching the cave, carrying equipment and discussing activities that clearly indicated their involvement in the criminal operation she had discovered. Their conversation included references to cleanup activities and new deliveries that suggested they were returning to continue their disposal activities. Trapped in the cave with no alternative exit route, Jovi was forced to hide in one of the deeper passages while the perpetrators conducted their activities in the main chambers. From her concealed position, she was able to observe and document the criminal operation, including the arrival of additional victims and the systematic processing of human remains that confirmed the cave was being used as a disposal site for serial murders. The criminal organization involved at least 6 individuals who demonstrated detailed knowledge of the cave system and efficient procedures for disposing of evidence. Their activities included the transportation of victims to the cave, systematic processing of remains to prevent identification, and distribution of bone fragments throughout multiple chambers to complicate potential discovery and investigation. Most chilling was their discussion of previous encounters with explorers and hikers who had discovered their operation. The perpetrators spoke casually about handling problems and ensuring that no one makes it back to report what they found. Their conversation included specific references to missing persons cases that had been attributed to hiking accidents or unexplained disappearances. Jovi remained hidden for over 8 hours while the criminal organization conducted their activities, documenting their procedures with photographs and audio recordings that would later prove crucial for law enforcement investigation. Her geological training and cave exploration experience allowed her to navigate the complex passages while avoiding detection, eventually finding an alternative exit through a narrow passage that connected to a sinkhole approximately half a mile from the main entrance. Upon reaching safety, she immediately contacted the West Virginia State Police and federal law enforcement agencies, providing detailed information about the crime scene and the active criminal operation she had witnessed. Her documentation included photographs, GPS coordinates, cave maps, and recordings that provided comprehensive evidence for launching a major criminal investigation. The law enforcement response involved multiple agencies, including the FBI, West Virginia State Police, and specialized cave rescue teams trained in underground crime scene investigation. The operation resulted in the arrest of 8 individuals involved in a sophisticated murder and disposal operation that had been active for over 15 years using remote cave systems throughout West Virginia and neighboring states. The investigation revealed that the criminal organization had been targeting hikers, hunters, and other outdoor enthusiasts who recreated alone in remote areas. Victims were kidnapped from trailheads and camping areas, transported to processing sites, and murdered before their remains were disposed of in cave systems that were unlikely to be discovered by law enforcement or casual explorers. Forensic analysis of the bone deposits recovered from Hidden Springs Cave identified remains from 43 different individuals, including victims from unsolved missing persons cases dating back to 2006. The systematic nature of the disposal operation had effectively concealed the true scope of the criminal organization's activities, with most disappearances attributed to hiking accidents or unexplained circumstances rather than homicide. Detective Angela Rodriguez of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit explained that the organization represented one of the most sophisticated serial killing operations ever discovered in the eastern United States. The use of remote cave systems for disposal, combined with careful victim selection and systematic evidence destruction, had allowed the perpetrators to operate for over a decade without detection. The case resulted in federal murder charges against all 8 defendants, with sentences ranging from life imprisonment to death penalty convictions for the organization's leaders. The investigation also led to the identification of additional disposal sites throughout the Appalachian region, resulting in the recovery of remains from dozens of additional victims and the resolution of missing persons cases spanning multiple states. Following the investigation, Jovi worked with law enforcement agencies and cave exploration organizations to develop safety protocols for cavers and other outdoor enthusiasts who might encounter evidence of criminal activity in remote areas. Her experience highlighted the importance of recognizing and reporting suspicious findings while prioritizing personal safety when discovering potential crime scenes. The case led to enhanced cooperation between cave exploration communities and law enforcement agencies, with established procedures for reporting and investigating suspicious discoveries in underground environments. Cave survey organizations now provide training for explorers on recognizing and responding appropriately to evidence of criminal activity while preserving evidence for law enforcement investigation. The psychological impact on Jovi was significant, fundamentally changing her approach to solo cave exploration. Despite her extensive experience and safety training, she now explores caves exclusively with partners and avoids systems with histories of unexplained discoveries or missing persons reports in the surrounding areas. The West Virginia State Police implemented new patrol activities in remote areas known for cave systems and established better communication protocols for reporting suspicious activities in underground environments. Warning signs were posted at trailheads advising outdoor enthusiasts about the potential for encountering crime scenes and providing emergency contact information for reporting discoveries. The case demonstrated that criminal organizations actively seek to exploit the isolation and limited law enforcement presence in remote underground environments for disposal activities. The sophisticated nature of the operation, including detailed knowledge of cave systems and systematic evidence destruction procedures, indicated significant investment in developing secure disposal methods that could continue for extended periods without detection. Detective Rodriguez noted that cave systems represent ideal disposal sites for criminal organizations because they provide complete isolation, protection from environmental factors that might disperse evidence, and extremely limited likelihood of discovery by law enforcement or the general public. The complex geology and dangerous conditions associated with cave exploration create additional barriers to investigation and evidence recovery. To this day, the investigation continues as law enforcement works to identify all disposal sites used by the organization and locate additional victims. The remote cave systems of West Virginia and surrounding states continue to be systematically searched for evidence of similar criminal activities, with cave exploration communities playing a crucial role in reporting suspicious discoveries. Jovi's experience serves as a critical reminder that remote wilderness areas, including underground environments, can provide cover for sophisticated criminal operations that prey on the isolation that attracts outdoor enthusiasts. Her survival and the successful resolution of the case depended on recognizing the danger immediately, documenting evidence professionally, and prioritizing escape over investigation when the situation became life-threatening. The Hidden Springs Cave has been permanently closed to public access and designated as a crime scene memorial site. The case remains one of the largest serial murder investigations in West Virginia history and continues to influence law enforcement protocols for investigating crimes in remote wilderness areas throughout the Appalachian region. Anakin had been rock climbing for 13 years, developing expertise in traditional and multi-pitch climbing throughout the eastern United States. As a 32-year-old software engineer from Richmond, he used his technical skills and attention to detail to plan challenging climbs in remote locations where his programming background helped him analyze route conditions, weather patterns, and safety protocols. His specialty was overnight multi-pitch climbs that required camping on ledges or portaledges, combining his love of climbing with backcountry camping in spectacular vertical environments. In late September 2023, Anakin planned a solo overnight climb on the North Peak of Seneca Rocks in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. The route he selected was a classic 5.7 multi-pitch climb known as Old Man's Route, which featured 4 pitches of traditional climbing culminating in a large ledge system suitable for overnight camping. The climb was technically moderate but required extensive route-finding skills and the ability to manage complex rope systems and protection placement over multiple pitches. Anakin's equipment reflected his experience with technical multi-pitch climbing and overnight vertical camping. His climbing gear included a full rack of traditional protection, multiple ropes, extensive hardware for belaying and rappelling, and a lightweight portaledge system for sleeping on vertical walls. His overnight equipment included a specialized sleeping bag rated for mountain conditions, minimal camping supplies optimized for weight and space, and emergency gear including first aid supplies, emergency bivy, and satellite communication device. Seneca Rocks was a landmark formation rising nearly 900 feet above the North Fork River, composed of hard sandstone that provided excellent climbing conditions and spectacular views of the surrounding Appalachian landscape. The area had significant cultural importance to Native American tribes, particularly the Seneca people for whom the formation was named, and contained archaeological evidence of human presence dating back thousands of years. Anakin arrived at the Seneca Rocks Discovery Center parking area at 6 a.m. on September 28th, allowing sufficient time for the approach hike and gear organization before beginning the technical climbing portions of the route. The parking area contained several other vehicles indicating moderate climbing activity for the season, though most appeared to belong to day climbers rather than overnight expeditions. He signed the climbing register with his planned route and expected return time of the following evening. The approach to the base of Old Man's Route required a 20-minute hike through mixed hardwood forest and over rocky terrain that provided access to the base of the North Peak's climbing routes. The trail was well established and marked with occasional blazes, passing through areas that showed clear evidence of the region's geological history and the cultural significance of the rock formation to indigenous peoples. At the base of the climb, Anakin organized his gear according to the complex requirements of multi-pitch traditional climbing, arranging protection hardware in the order needed for each pitch, checking rope systems and safety equipment, and reviewing route descriptions to ensure proper navigation through the technical sections. The first pitch began with moderate climbing through featured sandstone that provided secure handholds and protection placements. The climbing proceeded smoothly through the first 3 pitches, with each section offering different technical challenges and spectacular exposure as he gained elevation above the surrounding forest. The rock quality was excellent, providing secure protection placements and reliable holds that allowed efficient progress despite the technical nature of the route. By mid-afternoon, he had reached the large ledge system that served as the traditional camping location for overnight ascents. The camping ledge was approximately 6 feet wide and 15 feet long, providing adequate space for his portaledge system while offering dramatic views of the Potomac Highlands and surrounding mountain ranges. The location was sheltered from prevailing winds while remaining exposed enough to provide ventilation and prevent moisture buildup. Most importantly, the ledge offered multiple anchor points for securing his camping system and emergency safety lines. As evening approached, Anakin established his overnight camp according to standard big wall climbing practices, securing his portaledge to multiple bomber anchor points and organizing his gear to prevent any items from falling to climbers or hikers below. The setup process required careful attention to safety protocols, as any mistake could result in serious injury or death in the exposed vertical environment. The first unusual incident occurred shortly after sunset as he prepared his evening meal using a lightweight camping stove. From his elevated position, he noticed movement in the forest below that seemed inconsistent with normal wildlife activity. Dark figures appeared to be moving through the trees in coordinated patterns, traveling in groups of 3 or 4 individuals who maintained specific spacing and synchronized movement that suggested deliberate organization rather than casual hiking. Initially, Anakin assumed he was observing late-season hunters or wildlife researchers conducting evening activities in the forest. However, the movement patterns were unusual for human activity, featuring rapid travel through difficult terrain and coordination that would be extremely challenging to maintain in darkness without artificial lighting. Most concerning was the complete absence of headlamps, flashlights, or other equipment that would be essential for safe travel through forest terrain after dark. As full darkness settled over the area, the figures became more clearly visible against the forest canopy due to their darker silhouettes against the slightly lighter background of the night sky. From his elevated position approximately 400 feet above the forest floor, Anakin had an excellent vantage point for observing the movement patterns and behavior of the mysterious figures throughout the surrounding woodland areas. The entities appeared to be conducting some form of systematic search or patrol activity, covering specific areas of the forest in overlapping patterns that ensured complete coverage of the terrain below the rock formation. Their movements were fluid and rapid, navigating through dense vegetation and rocky terrain with an efficiency that seemed beyond normal human capabilities in darkness without artificial lighting assistance. Most disturbing was their apparent awareness of his presence on the rock face. At several points during the evening, groups of the figures would pause directly below his camping position and appear to be observing his activities. Despite the darkness and significant distance, their behavior suggested they were able to see him clearly and were monitoring his activities with intelligence and purpose that indicated conscious awareness rather than coincidental positioning. At approximately 10:30 p.m., the figures began exhibiting behavior that was clearly directed at him specifically. They arranged themselves in patterns around the base of the rock formation that appeared to be deliberate formations or symbols when viewed from his elevated position. The arrangements changed periodically, creating different geometric patterns that seemed to carry symbolic meaning, though their specific significance remained unclear to him. More unsettling was the discovery that the figures appeared to be attempting some form of communication through their positioning and movement patterns. They would create specific formations, maintain them for several minutes while apparently observing his response, then transition to different arrangements based on his reactions or lack thereof. The behavior suggested intelligence, organization, and specific interest in establishing contact or conveying information. The communication attempts intensified throughout the night, with the figures developing increasingly complex formations and movement patterns that clearly required coordination among multiple entities. At one point, they arranged themselves in what appeared to be representations of astronomical formations, creating patterns that corresponded to constellations visible in the night sky above the rock formation. Around midnight, the figures began climbing activities on the rock faces adjacent to his route, demonstrating abilities that defied explanation by conventional understanding of human climbing capabilities. They ascended vertical and overhanging rock faces without visible equipment or safety systems, moving rapidly through technical terrain that would challenge expert climbers even with modern equipment and adequate lighting. The climbing demonstrations appeared to be directed specifically at him, with the entities ascending routes that provided clear sight lines to his camping position while maintaining eye contact throughout their ascents. Their movements were fluid and confident, showing no hesitation or difficulty despite the technical nature of the terrain and complete absence of safety equipment or artificial lighting. Most concerning was their apparent ability to reach elevations that should have been impossible without technical climbing equipment. Several figures ascended to positions that were within 50 feet of his camping ledge, close enough that he could observe details of their appearance and behavior that revealed characteristics inconsistent with human physiology and capabilities. The entities appeared to be humanoid in basic structure, but exhibited proportions and movement patterns that suggested significant differences from normal human anatomy. Their limbs were elongated relative to typical human proportions, and their movements demonstrated flexibility and strength that exceeded normal human capabilities. Most notably, their eyes reflected available light in ways that suggested enhanced night vision capabilities. Rather than displaying aggressive behavior, the figures seemed to be attempting to communicate information about the cultural and spiritual significance of the rock formation. Through their positioning and movement patterns, they appeared to be indicating specific features of the surrounding landscape and demonstrating traditional uses of the area that suggested deep historical knowledge and cultural connection to the site. At approximately 3 a.m., the entities began what appeared to be a ceremony or ritual activity centered around the base of the rock formation. They arranged themselves in precise patterns while performing coordinated movements that resembled traditional indigenous dance or spiritual practices. The ceremony continued for over an hour and appeared to be related to astronomical events as their activities aligned with the movement of celestial bodies across the night sky. Throughout the ceremonial activity, the figures maintained awareness of Anakin's presence and appeared to be including him as an observer of their spiritual practices. Their behavior suggested that his presence was not considered intrusive or threatening, but rather that he was being granted the privilege of witnessing sacred activities that were normally conducted in complete privacy. As dawn approached, the figures gradually withdrew from the immediate area around the rock formation, moving back into the surrounding forest in the same organized patterns they had displayed throughout the night. Their departure was coordinated and systematic, suggesting that their activities followed specific protocols or traditions that governed their interaction with the sacred site. The final communication occurred just before the entities completely disappeared into the forest. The remaining figures arranged themselves in a formation that clearly represented a greeting or farewell gesture, maintaining the pattern until Anakin responded by raising his hand in acknowledgement. Only after receiving his response did they complete their withdrawal from the area. The fourth pitch of the climb the following morning proceeded without incident, though Anakin found himself frequently pausing to scan the forest below for any sign of the previous night's visitors. The rock formation and surrounding landscape appeared completely normal in daylight with no evidence of the extensive activity he had witnessed during the night hours. Upon completing the climb and returning to the Discovery Center, Anakin spoke with several park rangers and climbing guides about his experience. Ranger Patricia Mullins listened to his account with serious attention and revealed that the area had a long history of similar reports dating back to early European settlement, with consistent descriptions of nighttime encounters involving entities that demonstrated protective interest in the Seneca Rocks formation. According to Ranger Mullins, the Seneca people and other indigenous tribes considered the rock formation to be a sacred site with significant spiritual importance. Traditional stories described guardian spirits that protected the area from those who would misuse or desecrate the sacred landscape, while allowing respectful visitors to witness their spiritual practices as a form of blessing and education. The ranger explained that modern climbers and hikers occasionally reported encounters with mysterious figures during overnight stays in the area, particularly those who demonstrated respect for the cultural and environmental significance of the site. The entities were consistently described as non-threatening but clearly protective of the area, appearing to monitor human activities while educating respectful visitors about the site's spiritual importance. Dr. Margaret Runningbear, a cultural anthropologist from West Virginia University who specialized in indigenous spiritual traditions of the Appalachian region, provided additional context for Anakin's experience. She explained that many Native American tribes maintained beliefs about spiritual guardians who protected sacred sites from inappropriate use while facilitating positive interactions with respectful visitors. According to Dr. Runningbear, the behaviors Anakin described were consistent with traditional accounts of spiritual entities that served as intermediaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. The educational aspects of the encounter, including the astronomical demonstrations and ceremonial activities, suggested that the entities were sharing cultural knowledge with someone they deemed worthy of such instruction. The experience fundamentally changed Anakin's understanding of the relationship between outdoor recreation and cultural preservation. He became an advocate for education about the cultural significance of climbing areas and the importance of conducting outdoor activities in ways that respect indigenous cultural traditions and sacred sites. Following his encounter, Anakin worked with climbing organizations and Native American cultural groups to develop educational materials about the cultural significance of popular climbing destinations. His programs emphasize the importance of understanding and respecting indigenous cultural traditions while enjoying outdoor recreation activities in areas that hold spiritual importance for tribal communities. The Seneca Rocks area has since implemented enhanced educational programs that inform visitors about the cultural and spiritual significance of the formation while providing guidelines for conducting outdoor activities in ways that honor indigenous traditions. The programs emphasize that respectful behavior and cultural awareness can lead to positive interactions with the spiritual aspects of sacred sites. Park officials noted that reports of encounters with protective entities in the Seneca Rocks area consistently involved visitors who demonstrated respect for the environment and cultural significance of the site. Those who approached the area with inappropriate attitudes or engaged in destructive behaviors rarely reported positive interactions, suggesting that the entities were indeed protective guardians that responded to visitors' intentions and behavior. To this day, Anakin considers his encounter at Seneca Rocks to be one of the most meaningful experiences of his climbing career. The interaction with entities that appeared to be guardians of a sacred site provided him with a deeper understanding of the cultural dimensions of outdoor recreation and the responsibility that comes with accessing areas of spiritual significance to indigenous peoples. The case continues to be studied by anthropologists and paranormal researchers as an example of positive interaction between outdoor recreationists and unexplained phenomena in areas of cultural significance. Whether the entities represent actual spiritual guardians, unknown natural phenomena, or psychological experiences related to the powerful atmosphere of sacred sites continues to be debated among researchers and cultural practitioners. Anakin's experience serves as a reminder that many outdoor recreation areas occupy landscapes that hold deep cultural and spiritual significance for indigenous peoples, and that respectful behavior and cultural awareness can enhance rather than detract from outdoor experiences. His encounter demonstrates the potential for positive interactions between outdoor enthusiasts and the spiritual dimensions of the natural world when activities are conducted with appropriate respect and understanding. Indy had been practicing wilderness survival techniques for 10 years, combining her passion for primitive skills with advanced survival training that she used to teach outdoor education classes throughout the Southeast. As a 34-year-old former military survival instructor from Asheville, she possessed extensive knowledge of wilderness navigation, shelter construction, food procurement, and emergency survival protocols that allowed her to thrive in challenging backcountry environments where others might struggle or perish. In early December 2022, Indy planned a solo 7-day primitive survival expedition in the remote highlands of eastern Tennessee, specifically targeting an area of the Cherokee National Forest that was known for its challenging terrain, minimal human presence, and diverse ecosystem that would test her complete range of survival skills. The expedition was intended as both personal challenge and professional development, allowing her to refine techniques she taught in her survival education programs. Indy's equipment was deliberately minimal, reflecting the primitive survival nature of her expedition. She carried basic tools including a fixed-blade knife, fire steel, emergency first aid supplies, and topographic maps, but relied primarily on her knowledge and skills to provide shelter, food, water, and warmth using materials available in the natural environment. Her clothing was appropriate for winter mountain conditions, but avoided modern technical fabrics in favor of natural materials that aligned with her primitive skills focus. The starting point for her expedition was a remote Forest Service road that terminated approximately 12 miles southeast of Tellico Plains, providing access to unmarked trails that led into the most isolated sections of the national forest. When she arrived at the trailhead on December 3rd, the area was completely deserted with no evidence of recent human activity and minimal vehicle traffic on the deteriorating access road. The first 3 days of the expedition proceeded according to her planned itinerary as she established base camps in different locations while practicing various survival techniques, including shelter construction, water procurement, food gathering, and navigation without modern equipment. The weather conditions were challenging but manageable, with temperatures dropping into the 20s at night and occasional light snow that tested her ability to maintain warmth and dryness using primitive methods. On the morning of December 6th, while searching for suitable materials for shelter construction, Indy discovered what appeared to be a well-maintained log cabin in a small clearing approximately 2 miles from any marked trail or Forest Service road. The cabin was traditional Appalachian construction featuring hand-hewn logs, chinking between the joints, and a stone chimney that was actively producing smoke, indicating current habitation despite the remote location. The discovery was puzzling because her topographic maps showed no structures in the area, and the cabin appeared to be in excellent condition despite being located in terrain that would make access extremely difficult for construction materials and supplies. Most concerning was the absence of any visible access route that would allow vehicle traffic or heavy equipment transport to reach the construction site. As she observed the cabin from the edge of the clearing, Indy noticed additional details that seemed inconsistent with modern construction or restoration projects. The cabin showed signs of continuous habitation over many years, with well-worn paths between the structure and various outbuildings, including a root cellar, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a workshop or storage building. However, all structures appeared to be constructed using traditional techniques and materials from an earlier historical period. More intriguing was the complete absence of modern conveniences or equipment around the cabin site. There were no power lines, telephone connections, satellite dishes, or other infrastructure that would be expected for a remote residence in the 21st century. Instead, the property featured traditional elements including a hand-dug well, split-rail fencing, and what appeared to be a kitchen garden laid out according to historical farming practices. Smoke continued to rise from the chimney throughout her observation period, and she occasionally glimpsed movement inside the cabin through windows that appeared to be covered with oiled paper rather than glass. The signs of active habitation suggested that someone was currently living in the cabin, though their isolation and traditional lifestyle raised questions about their circumstances and connection to the modern world. After observing the cabin for over an hour without seeing any residents, Indy made the decision to approach the structure and attempt to make contact with whoever might be living there. Her survival training emphasized the importance of maintaining positive relationships with local residents when operating in remote areas, and she hoped to gain information about the surrounding terrain and potential hazards. As she approached the cabin, she noticed that the construction techniques and materials were consistent with Appalachian building practices from the early to mid-19th century. The logs were hand-hewn with broad axe marks clearly visible. The chinking was traditional clay and moss mixture, and the hardware appeared to be hand-forged iron rather than modern manufactured materials. The level of authenticity was remarkable, suggesting either an extraordinary restoration project or genuine historical construction. When she knocked on the heavy wooden door, it was opened by a woman who appeared to be in her 40s, dressed in clothing that was consistent with 19th century frontier fashion. The woman's appearance and demeanor suggested someone who lived a completely traditional lifestyle with no apparent knowledge of or connection to modern society. She greeted Indy with hospitality but apparent confusion about her modern clothing and equipment. The woman introduced herself as Martha Patterson and welcomed Indy into the cabin with the generous hospitality characteristic of Appalachian culture. However, the interior of the cabin reinforced the impression that she had encountered people living in a completely different time period. The furnishings, cooking equipment, lighting, and household items were all consistent with 19th century frontier life, with no evidence of modern conveniences or technology. Martha explained that she lived in the cabin with her husband Thomas and their 3 children, describing a lifestyle of complete self-sufficiency based on traditional farming, hunting, and craft production. Their conversation revealed that Martha possessed detailed knowledge of the surrounding terrain and wildlife, but seemed to have no awareness of modern developments in the region, including the establishment of the national forest, modern transportation networks, or contemporary society. Most puzzling was Martha's response to questions about the current date and historical events. She consistently referred to the year as 1847 and discussed contemporary events, including political figures and social conditions that were historically accurate for the mid-19th century, but completely inconsistent with current reality. Her knowledge was detailed and consistent, suggesting either extraordinary historical education or genuine belief that she was living in the 1840s. When Thomas Patterson returned to the cabin that afternoon, he exhibited the same temporal displacement as his wife, discussing current events, weather patterns, and local conditions from the perspective of someone living in 1847. His appearance, clothing, equipment, and knowledge were all consistent with a 19th century frontier lifestyle, including detailed familiarity with historical conditions and contemporary figures from that time period. The Patterson family invited Indy to share their evening meal and stay overnight in their cabin, offering hospitality that was generous but completely grounded in 19th century customs and expectations. The family's behavior and conversation throughout the evening maintained perfect consistency with their claimed time period, including references to neighbors, local conditions, and upcoming events that would only be relevant to someone actually living in 1847. During her overnight stay, Indy attempted to introduce topics and references from the modern world to test the family's awareness of current reality. However, they showed no recognition of 20th or 21st century developments, displaying confusion or complete lack of comprehension when she mentioned modern technology, historical events, or social changes that had occurred after their claimed time period. Most unsettling was the family's detailed knowledge of people and events from 1847 that could only be obtained through extensive historical research or actual experience. They discussed neighbors who had historically lived in the region during that time period, referenced local events that were documented in historical records, and demonstrated familiarity with conditions and circumstances that were accurate for the mid-19th century. On the second night of her stay with the Patterson family, Indy attempted to use her GPS device and other modern equipment to confirm her location and establish communication with the outside world. However, all electronic devices failed to function properly while she was in the vicinity of the cabin, showing error messages or complete failure that prevented normal operation. When she attempted to leave the cabin area to test her equipment at a distance, she discovered that her GPS and other devices resumed normal function as soon as she moved approximately 100 yards away from the cabin site. The electronic failures appeared to be localized around the Patterson property, suggesting some form of electromagnetic interference or field effect that prevented modern technology from operating normally. More disturbing was her discovery that when she returned to the cabin site after testing her equipment, the family showed no memory of her previous visit or conversations. Martha and Thomas greeted her as if meeting her for the first time, offering the same hospitality and conversation they had provided during her initial encounter. The family's complete lack of memory of their previous interactions suggested that time itself was behaving differently in the vicinity of their cabin. On her third attempt to leave the cabin area, Indy made careful note of her route and timing to ensure she could navigate back to the location. However, when she returned to what should have been the cabin site, she found only forest with no evidence that a cabin or clearing had ever existed in that location. The terrain was consistent with undisturbed woodland that had not been cleared or modified by human activity. Concerned about her ability to navigate accurately, Indy used her GPS device to confirm her position and verify that she had returned to the correct coordinates. Her electronic navigation confirmed that she was in the exact location where she had encountered the Patterson cabin, but the site now showed no evidence of human presence or structural development. Her attempts to relocate the cabin over the following 2 days were completely unsuccessful. Despite careful attention to navigation and systematic search of the surrounding area, she found no trace of the cabin, clearing, outbuildings, or other evidence of the Patterson family's presence. Despite having spent 3 days at their site and documenting numerous details of their property and lifestyle, the experience created significant psychological stress as Indy questioned her memory, navigation skills, and mental health. Her survival training had taught her to rely on observation and documentation, but the complete disappearance of a location where she had spent 3 days challenged her understanding of reality and created doubt about her ability to distinguish between real experiences and possible hallucinations or psychological breakdown. However, physical evidence supported the reality of her experience with the Patterson family. Her clothing retained odors from the cabin's wood smoke and cooking fires. She had consumed traditional foods that affected her digestion in ways consistent with the frontier diet, and her equipment showed where patterns consistent with her claimed activities during the missing 3 days. Most compelling was her discovery of items in her pack that she did not remember acquiring, including hand-carved wooden utensils, dried herbs prepared according to 19th century methods, and a piece of traditional pottery that appeared to be authentic period craftsmanship. The items showed aging and were patterns consistent with historical artifacts rather than modern reproductions. When Indy completed her survival expedition and returned to civilization, she researched historical records for the area where she had encountered the Patterson family. Her research revealed that Thomas and Martha Patterson had indeed lived in that region during the 1840s, with census records and land ownership documents confirming their presence and family composition exactly as she had observed. More unsettling was her discovery that the Patterson family had disappeared from historical records in 1847 with no documentation of their departure from the area or relocation to other regions. Local historical accounts mention their sudden disappearance as one of several mysterious incidents that occurred in that section of the mountains during the mid-19th century. The historical research also revealed that the area where she encountered the cabin had been the site of several other temporal anomaly reports over the past century, including encounters with people and structures from different historical periods that would appear briefly before disappearing without physical trace. However, most of these reports had been dismissed as folklore or psychological experiences rather than genuine phenomena. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, a physicist at the University of Tennessee who specialized in studying temporal anomalies and unexplained phenomena, reviewed Indy's account and the physical evidence she had collected. Dr. Morrison noted that the artifacts appeared to be genuine 19th century items rather than modern reproductions, suggesting that Indy had indeed acquired materials from an authentic historical source. According to Dr. Morrison's analysis, certain locations in the Appalachian Mountains might contain natural conditions that create temporal displacement effects, allowing brief interactions between different time periods. While the mechanisms behind such phenomena remained unknown to current science, the consistency of reports from the region suggested that genuine temporal anomalies might occur under specific environmental conditions. The experience fundamentally changed Indy's understanding of the relationship between time, space, and human consciousness. She became interested in researching other reports of temporal displacement in the Appalachian region and working with scientists to better understand the phenomena that allowed her encounter with the Patterson family. Following her experience, Indy modified her survival training programs to include discussions of unexplained phenomena that outdoor enthusiasts might encounter in remote wilderness areas. Her courses emphasized the importance of documenting unusual experiences while maintaining appropriate skepticism about extraordinary claims that challenge conventional understanding of reality. The Cherokee National Forest area where she encountered the Patterson cabin has become the focus of ongoing research by scientists studying temporal anomalies and unexplained phenomena. While no definitive explanation has been established for the experiences reported in that region, the consistency of accounts suggests that genuine anomalous effects may occur under specific environmental conditions. To this day, Indy cannot fully explain her 3-day encounter with a 19th century family living in a cabin that apparently exists outside normal temporal boundaries. The combination of detailed historical accuracy, physical evidence, and complete disappearance of the site suggests either a remarkable series of coincidences or some form of temporal displacement that science has not yet identified or understood. The case continues to be studied by researchers investigating the intersection between consciousness, time, and environmental factors in creating anomalous experiences. Whether Indy's encounter represents genuine temporal displacement, altered consciousness, or some other phenomenon remains an open question that challenges conventional understanding of the nature of time and reality. Her experience serves as a reminder that remote wilderness areas may contain phenomena that exceed current scientific understanding and that outdoor enthusiasts should remain open to extraordinary experiences while maintaining appropriate documentation and skepticism about claims that challenge conventional knowledge of the natural world. The artifacts she collected during her encounter with the Patterson family continue to be analyzed by historians and scientists, providing physical evidence that supports the reality of her experience while raising questions about the mechanisms that might allow genuine interaction between different historical periods in specific locations throughout the Appalachian region. Thank you for watching this episode of Midnight Hollow. These 9 stories represent just a fraction of the unexplained encounters reported throughout the Appalachian Mountains. If you have experienced something similar or would like to share your own story, please reach out to us through the contact information in the description below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content exploring the darker side of the world around us.